Hello and welcome. I'm Nadira Tudor and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. Putin warns the West he could strike back against those who supplied weapons to Ukraine, while Zelensky says the world must respond. Meanwhile, the UK and France join forces, pledging to relentlessly support Ukraine against Russia. In the United States, a New York judge officially postpones the hush-money sentencing of Donald Trump in Manhattan. And a sixth foreign tourist and second Australian teenager dies of suspected methanol poisoning in Laos as hostel staff are questioned. The world must respond after Russia claims to have fired a new type of missile, says Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky. He's accused Russia's President Putin of a clear and severe escalation as the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro was hit. Putin says this is a reaction to Ukraine using US and UK-supplied long-range missiles on Russian soil and warns that his forces could attack Western countries. For more on this, I'm joined from Kyiv by our correspondent, Megumi Lin. Megumi, we really are seeing daily escalations at the moment with this conflict, very much a tit-for-tat approach from both sides. What's the latest from Ukraine's President Zelensky?
That's right. Things have really escalated this week between Russia and Ukraine. The latest from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is that he has called for a strong response from world leaders to condemn what he called a, quote, clear and severe escalation of the war by Russia. He said, quote, the use of the ballistic missile against Ukraine is yet more proof that Russia has no interest in peace. Now, he's saying this in response to that recent attack on Thursday against the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro with the use of the Russian experimental intermediate range ballistic missile. Now, we have, however, seen also responses coming from world leaders today. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz saying that Russia's use of this new missile was, quote, a terrible escalation, and also from Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk saying that he sees a real risk of a global conflict breaking out. He said, quote, we feel that the unknown is approaching. But the latest that has come out from Ukraine just about an hour ago is that the Ukrainian military intelligence has released the first assessment of the weapon that was used against the city of Dnipro on Thursday. They're saying that this missile that was used reached a top speed of more than 13,000 kilometers per hour, and it took 15 minutes to reach its target from its launch site, which was located about 1,200 kilometers away in Russia's Astrakhan region. Now, they're saying that this missile was equipped with 6 warheads, each also equipped with 6 sub-munitions.
That is quite a statistic, isn't it, Megumi? 14,000 kilometers per hour in 15 minutes. Let's look at the other side. The latest from Russia's President Putin. What's his position?
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin has also called the use of Ukraine's use of the American-supplied ATACMS missiles and the British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles against Russia's Kursk and Bryansk region an escalation in the war. He's accused the West of escalating towards the war towards a global conflict. And again, he's blamed Ukraine's use of these missiles, Western-supplied missiles, for this escalation. He said that Russia's use of this new experimental missile was in response to these strikes carried out by Ukraine this week. And he's also warned that more attacks could follow. He said that this new missile can fly at the speed of 10 times the speed of sound, and that no air defense systems can intercept these missiles. Now, he's saying that Russia will warn civilians beforehand, before these strikes would take place. But he's also, again, sending a strong message to the West that Russia is also willing to use weapons against countries that have aided Ukraine or will aid Ukraine by sending arms that Ukraine will then use to strike at targets inside Russia. So again, we're seeing, again, as you said, an escalation in the war between Russia and Ukraine this week.
Megumi Lim in Kyiv, thank you for the update. Meanwhile, France has come forward with their position with regards to the Ukraine-Russia war. The French foreign minister is visiting London for talks and has pledged to relentlessly support Ukraine against Russia. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin, he issued this stark warning to the West.
As a result of the escalation, the United States and their NATO allies said that they give their permission to use long-range weapons against targets inside Russia. Experts know fully well, and the Russian side has underscored this time and again, that using such weapons without the direct involvement of military operators from manufacturing countries is impossible. I repeat, the use of such weapons cannot change the course of the special military operation. Our military is successfully advancing along the entire line of contact, and all the objectives that we set before ourselves will be met.
For more on this, I'm joined from London by our correspondent, Ollie Barrett. Ollie, this trip by the French Foreign Minister is quite significant, isn't it?
Significant, certainly, in both sides presenting it that way, absolutely. Heading into the talks, they wrote a joint article in one of the British newspapers saying that they would fight relentlessly against the Russian invasion of Ukraine when it comes to supporting the Ukrainians, but also talking in very strong terms about the position on Russia, saying that they see the involvement in that conflict, the allegations of involvement in that conflict by countries such as North Korea and Iran when it comes to troops and weapons supplies as well. They called that the Putinization of global architecture and said that that was something that the UK and France would work together to stand against. The location for the talks as well, an attempt by the British to mark the end of the Second World War too, given the armistice days marking that we've seen recently at this time of year. It took place just opposite Carlton Gardens in central London, which was General de Gaulle's base during the occupation of Paris in World War II. So the symbolism was certainly strong as well during these discussions. A major focus on Ukraine, but also talking about the crisis in the Middle East. But we're also told that the two foreign ministers focused on other issues of cooperation too, from climate to trade to artificial intelligence and more besides. So certainly both sides absolutely of the view that these were significant talks here in London.
You've mentioned a number of issues that they've been talking about and the key areas, obviously, that they were going to discuss. But what about the key areas with regards to Russia-Ukraine?
In the difficulties we've seen in recent days with all of the tensions following the decision to allow the Ukrainians to use Storm Shadow missiles to strike deeper inside Russia, you expect that that would have been part of the discussions behind closed doors, but it remains something that European leaders are not keen to talk about, particularly in public. And so the support for Ukraine is key to these discussions. And this is really another example of the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer attempting to show that he can reset or rebuild relations with European capitals, but it's also part of attempts by European capitals more widely to show that they are united when it comes to support for Ukraine. And again, that flows from the concern here in Europe that when US President-elect Donald Trump gets back into the White House, that if American support for Kyiv tapers away, European capitals like London and Paris want to show that they remain remain united and remain supportive of Ukraine's efforts to, in the words of Kiev, win the war against Vladimir Putin. That looks a difficult prospect at the moment, given the state on the battlefield inside Ukraine. But as I say, European capitals, given what is unfolding across the Atlantic and the uncertainty around what the Trump administration might do when it comes to Kiev, France and the UK using meetings like this to show that their support for the Ukrainians remains unwavering.
Ollie, what's been the reaction from the UK and France with regards to the International Criminal Court, the ICC's decision? Are the two countries on the same page?
Sort of, in the sense that the two countries are expressing support for the principles of the ICC. There's been some confusion here in the UK, though, about the government's position, which has had to be somewhat clarified. When that announcement was initially made by the ICC, the initial UK government response was to say that it supports the independence of the International Criminal Court. That was interpreted by some as a backing for the idea that if Benjamin Netanyahu were to travel to the UK, that the UK government would attempt to arrest him. But that was clouded somewhat earlier in the day when the Home Secretary, the Interior Minister, Yvette Cooper, was questioned about this topic and asked what would happen if Benjamin Netanyahu came to Britain. Would the UK be obliged to arrest him? She didn't sound certain about the exact response. She referred to things like process and said that she might not be the minister that would be involved in that decision-making process. And so that in turn led to journalists asking Downing Street here in London today what exactly the position was. And Downing Street wouldn't get into too many specifics and didn't want to talk about what it called hypotheticals, but said that yes, the UK government would follow its international obligations. Well, what flows from that is that the UK would be obliged under international law and its commitment to the ICC to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu were he to travel to the UK. That said, there's no current prospect of such a visit taking place. And the other thing that Downing Street was making clear today is that it says that Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, will absolutely continue to talk to Benjamin Netanyahu about the crisis in the Middle East and will continue to engage what the UK government called with its allies. And so a difficult path to tread for the UK on this one, but we have had that clarification through the day that the UK would follow its obligations when it comes to the ICC. And as I say, what flows from that is that if Benjamin Netanyahu were to venture to Britain under the current state of play, the UK would be obliged to arrest him under that ICC arrest warrant.
Ollie Barrett in London, thank you. Let's have a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The car park at Iceland's Blue Lagoon has become engulfed in lava after the volcano nearby erupted for the 7th time in the last year. People staying at nearby hotels and homes were evacuated, but there's no threat to air travel in the region. An American medic has become the first recipient of the world's first fully robotic double lung. Cheryl Mercart lived with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease for the last 10 years. She'll be released from a hospital in New York in the coming days. It's thought the technology will mean minimal invasive surgery, reduce hospital stays and speed up recovery. And pop singer Katy Perry has successfully appealed a trademark decision after she was sued by an Australian designer who shares the same birth name. Judges overturned a court decision earlier today that previously favoured the fashion designer. The court said singer Perry had been using her name before the Australian started her business and had earned an international reputation in entertainment. The International Criminal Court's decision to issue arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant has sent shockwaves around the world and met with condemnation by Israel and some of its staunchest allies. The court alleges both Netanyahu and Gallant have committed war crimes, including the use of starvation as a weapon of war and indiscriminate targeting of a civilian population. For more on this, I'm joined from London by Alon Levy, former spokesman for the State of Israel and currently host of the Israel State of a Nation podcast. Welcome to the programme, Alon.
Hello, good to join you.
Alon, do you think the International Criminal Court has made the right decision by issuing the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant?
No, the International Criminal Court has issued these arrest warrants after distorting the facts and twisting the law. I think the people of Gaza know better than the judges at the ICC that the source of their misery is Hamas. They know that this war started because Hamas launched war on October 7th with the October 7th massacre. They know that there has been tremendous civilian suffering because Hamas hides weapons and fighters in their schools, in their mosques, in their homes, even under UN facilities. They know that there is no starvation because they have seen the over 1 million tons of aid that have entered Gaza aboard nearly 60,000 trucks. And they know that Israel isn't targeting them because Israel keeps asking them to move to safety out of harm's way, away from places where Hamas is trying to use them as human shields and indeed human sacrifices. That's why we see that support for Hamas in Gaza has plummeted to 3%. Because the people of Gaza understand that the source of their suffering is the Hamas regime that is determined to use them as martyrs and as human cannon fodder and could end this war tomorrow by releasing the hostages and surrendering.
Alon, I do have to go back to my original question, though. So what the ICC have said is that they've accused them of using starvation as a weapon of war and indiscriminate targeting of a civilian population. So they are accusing Netanyahu of that. Do you agree with that? Because they're looking at the individual rather than Hamas or the IDF or the Israeli management seniors or whatever. So could you answer that question?
As I said, the request for the arrest warrants, every single line in that document was based on falsehoods. They allege, for example, starvation. That is impossible to reconcile with the fact that over 1 million tons of aid have entered Gaza since Hamas started this war, with the fact that Israel has opened 5 new crossings that didn't exist when Hamas launched this war, with the fact that inside Gaza right now there are hundreds of aid trucks Israel has let into Gaza and the UN hasn't collected. In fact, the UN stopped counting alleged deaths by starvation a long time ago because there is no evidence of deaths by starvation. There are some very sad cases of people who had pre-existing medical conditions. We saw those on television. But the reason that we haven't seen any starvation is that aid continues to flow into Gaza. And that's because Israel's policy is to allow the international community to bring in as much aid as it wants. And if you have a look at the request for arrest warrants, you'll see just how farcical it is. The prosecutor accuses Israel of closing the Rafah border crossing on the 8th of October. The Rafah border crossing is a crossing between Egypt and Gaza. Israel didn't close it on October 8th. He accuses Israel of closing the Erez crossing to goods. Again, the Erez crossing was a pedestrian crossing that Hamas destroyed when it massacred and abducted the staff on October 7th. So when you go through the allegations one by one, it is clear the arrest warrant could only be requested on the base of falsehoods. And that is why it is wrong for the ICC to try to go after the leaders of a democratic country fighting to defend their people from the threat of extermination. Because that is indeed what they say in the arrest warrant they issued for Mohammed Deif, who is dead, in fact, that on October 7th, Hamas committed the crime of extermination and has been threatening to do it again and again until Israel is destroyed.
Alon, you mentioned, obviously you've made your point very clear about Gallant and Netanyahu, and you've mentioned Deif. So the ICC, they've also issued arrest warrants for Hamas's Mohammed Deif, and it's unknown whether he's dead or alive because the information has come from Israeli officials saying that he's dead. Do you agree, or do you agree with that decision that the ICC have made?
We think that Hamas's leaders should surrender. They should surrender, they should release the hostages, and then those leaders should face justice.
Do you agree?
It is outrageous.
Alon, do you agree that
Yes.
the ICC have issued an arrest warrant for them? for him?
I don't know whether technically the ICC has jurisdiction, but we would want to see all surviving Hamas leaders tried for the war crimes of October 7th, including the Hamas leaders who currently have safe haven in Qatar. The United States should be demanding that they too be extradited to whatever court, to the United States in particular, to face justice for the crimes they committed through the sadistic slaughter of October 7th.
Alon Levy, former spokesman for the State of Israel and host of the Israel State of Nation podcast. Thank you very much for coming onto the programme and talking to us.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. A Manhattan judge who's been presiding over the Donald Trump New York hush money trial has postponed next week's sentencing. With his other criminal trials on the brink of termination after his election triumph, the US president-elect has managed to largely evade repercussions from America's justice system and now has a chance to bend it in his favour as soon as he takes office. With a look at how Trump could reshape the rule of law, Benji Hire reports.
This became a familiar sight in 2024. Donald Trump facing dozens of charges in multiple indictments. He didn't win in the courtroom,
Donald Trump will become the 47th president of
but at the ballot box. And that victory is enough to consign his outstanding trials to the ash heap of history.
He could direct the Justice Department to drop the federal cases. He could potentially try to pardon himself. That hasn't been challenged yet in court. We don't know whether the president is allowed to pardon himself, but the pardon power is pretty broad, so I could imagine the Supreme Court saying he can. That would get rid of the prosecutions altogether.
The man Trump wanted to oversee this is Matt Gaetz, who stood by the ex-president during his many legal woes.
This is a made-up crime. No other American in the country would be charged with this type of crime. It's like the Mr. Potato Head doll of crimes, where they had to stick together a bunch of things that did not belong together. I'm just asking you.
But the former Florida congressman on Thursday pulled out of the race to head the very department that has investigated him for sex crimes that he denies committing. In his place, Trump's chosen veteran prosecutor Pam Bondi as the next attorney general. Another staunch defender of Trump, she would have the power and will to shut down his remaining criminal cases, including the one related to this. Supporters of Trump launched a deadly assault on the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, in an attempt to overturn the results of the previous election. Trump's role in inciting this mob was effectively nullified by a Supreme Court ruling which grants him presidential immunity, and the prosecution over his alleged involvement is also winding up in coming weeks, given a sitting president cannot face charges. It's forcing special counsel Jack Smith to finish his investigation sooner than intended in order to get ahead of Trump's promise to fire him within seconds of being sworn in. And it means Smith would leave without his cases actually seeing trial, the one dealing with election interference and Trump's alleged hoarding of classified documents, which was dismissed by a Trump-appointed judge in Florida this summer. But what about those convicted of partaking in the riot at the Capitol building and who are now in prison? Might the president-elect make good on his oft-repeated pledge to pardon them and the hundreds of defendants who still await trial? It is wholly up to Trump to decide. There are no constraints besides how it would look politically. On optics, Trump's stance is pretty clear. His first rally for the 2024 campaign opened with him saluting a choir of imprisoned insurrectionists singing the national anthem from behind bars. They could soon walk free, with their hero, a fellow convicted felon and twice impeached president, back in the White House. Benji Hire, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's have a look at some of the top business news. Clothing company Gap shares have risen today as the retail giant returns to growth ahead of the Christmas shopping season. The group's CEO, who took over last year, has pushed to improve the in-store experience and tap into new trends, and their annual net sales are expected to rise. The coronation of King Charles in 2023 cost British taxpayers £72 million, according to new government figures. It's the first coronation to take place in the UK since Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. The country's Department of Culture, Media and Sport, who were responsible for coordinating the event, said the celebration was a once-in-a-generation moment. Turning to sport now, and Manchester City Football Club have lost their battle against the Premier League over financial rules. The club had previously challenged the football body's decision to change associated party transaction rules to make them compliant with competition law. And Lewis Hamilton has topped both sessions in the first day of the Las Vegas Grand Prix, with championship favourite and current leader Max Verstappen 2 seconds off pace. McLaren's Lando Norris came second fastest behind Mercedes driver Hamilton. An Australian teenager has become the 6th foreign tourist to die in a suspected mass methanol poisoning in Laos. A growing list of countries warned of the potentially fatal consequences of drinking tainted alcohol in the Southeast Asian country. A British woman, another Australian teenager, an American and 2 Danes have also died in recent days following a spate of suspected poisonings in the popular backpacker destination of Vang Vieng, according to authorities. Laura Westbrook reports.
Holly Bowles was 19 and had been on life support in critical condition for several days in neighbouring Thailand after being evacuated from Laos following a night out, according to 7 News. Her friend Bianca Jones, also 19, died on Thursday. Bowles' family said in a statement on Friday, "It is with broken hearts and we are so sad to say that our beautiful girl Holly is now at peace." British lawyer Simone White, who's 28, from southeast London, was confirmed to have died on Thursday. An American man and 2 Danish women aged 19 and 20 have also died, though the specifics about the causes of death have not been released yet. New Zealand's Foreign Ministry said one of its citizens was sickened in Laos and was a possible victim of methanol poisoning. And the US State Department issued a warning to travelers to be on alert to the potential risk of methanol poisoning. Vang Vieng is a small town with a reputation for partying and is particularly popular with backpackers. The victims are believed to have consumed drinks tainted with methanol. This is sometimes added to mixed drinks at disreputable bars as a cheaper alternative to ethanol, but can cause severe poisoning or death. The Nana backpacker hostel where the Australian teenagers were staying has said it gave out free shots to around 100 guests the previous evening. The hostel's manager told the news agency Associated Press that no other guests had become unwell. The manager of the hostel has since been detained for questioning by police. Australia is pushing authorities to open up their investigation into the incident, which is also reported to have left another British woman in hospital. Laura Westbrook for Al Arabia News, Hong Kong.
Let's have a reminder of today's top stories. Putin warns the West he could strike back against those who supplied weapons to Ukraine, while Zelensky says the world must respond. Meanwhile, the UK and France join forces, pledging to relentlessly support Ukraine against Russia. In the United States, a New York judge officially postpones the hush money sentencing of Donald Trump in Manhattan. And a 6th foreign tourist and a 2nd Australian teenager dies of suspected methanol poisoning in Laos as hostel staff are questioned. That's all from us on W News. Thanks for joining us. Coming up next, Hadley Gamble's interview with the Iraqi president, and afterwards, Tom Burgess-Watson for GNT. Good night.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Mr. President, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya.
Thank you.
I want to kick off by asking you to give me your assessment of what's happening right now in the United States, the election of Donald Trump once again. What does that mean for Iraq?
Well, everybody's been following the United States election. What we hope to do, new administration, because we have heard so many messages from it, that he will keep peace and stability in the world. I think that's our ultimate aim from President Trump, to carry out his message and to physically implement peace and security between all the countries and resolve the conflict which we have.
Does that mean that U.S. troops should be out of Iraq?
Well, that's not a big, really concern at this stage, because the world is facing bigger challenges. We have war in Europe, we have war in the Middle East, especially the Palestinian problem, and we have war in many other places in African countries. I think Iraq, fortunately, for the last few years, we have been enjoying safe and security in Iraq. And I think our aim in Iraq and our goal in Iraq is to see peace and security between every country and to solve the conflicts which are causing too many human lives, damaging economy, even damaging trade, and creating political problems between many countries.
In your mind, what is the solution there? Because President-elect Trump has made no secret that he believes Iran is the biggest problem facing the region.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to go to that detail, but I think these problems, especially in the Middle East, I believe they can be sorted out, they can be solved if there are good intentions and treat everybody on the same level. That's what I believe. Middle East is a rich area. It has got history, traditional history, number of religions, number of nationalities live in the Middle East. I think we can only live in harmony if we solve our conflicts and our problems. And I believe the conflicts in the Middle East are not unsolvable. They are solvable. They can be easily solved if good attentions and if enough attention is given to the problem for solving the problem, not encouraging the problem by the bigger powers.
Talk me through this. Benjamin Netanyahu, he's just been convicted by the ICC, the International Criminal Court. In your mind, does that affect in any way the conflict?
Well, I'm not a supporter of Netanyahu. And I think he has committed crimes on a large scale on Palestinian people. And my thoughts and my support is for Palestinian people to achieve self-determination, to be living on the area peacefully and look after their families and children. Everybody knows how many babies, how many children, how many women, how many men have been killed during this conflict.
Is he guilty of war crimes?
Well, that's not for me to say. The court has decided.
they're pushing back on that decision. They're calling it anti-Semitism.
Well, they can push back a lot of things, but the reality is in the court, and I don't think the court is biased towards any decision. I mean, this is their decision to make.
Talk me through this one. President-elect Trump is coming into office in a couple of months. He says he's going to put an end to wars, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe as well. Do you believe he has a chance of achieving that?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I think there is a good chance for achieving that in every corner. No nation wants war.
No.
They are imposed on them. So I think if President Trump is aiming for that, I wish him all the luck, and I think everybody globally will be happy about it.
You've mentioned that Iraq's had quite a bit of stability as opposed to recent decades over the last couple of years. In your mind, that obviously will bring a lot of opportunities for investment to this country.
Well, let me just say, Iraq has always been a rich country. Iraq has got the oldest history in the world regarding civilization, culture, education, and even development started over 6,000 years ago, and it has been continuous. But unfortunately, for the last nearly 50 years, Iraqi people, we have lived in conflicts. Sometimes it's been internal conflict, sometimes it's been outside conflicts. We experienced all of it: war, invasion, occupation, sanctions, and lately, only up to a few years ago, we experienced terrorism, which ended up by having terrorism of Daesh on large part of Iraq. But I'm glad to say we have closed that chapter. And the new chapter is we want to keep peace and security for Iraqi people, to live in harmony, and then the government has got a plan for services, for development, for investments. Yes, we need investment. Iraqi investment and outside investment.
Are you worried that Iran could pull you into the regional conflict?
No, I don't believe that they will pull. The relationship between Iran and Iraq is very strong. We have at least 1,200 kilometers of border. Most of the populations are relative of each other.
Yeah.
So, no, we can, I'm sure if we solve the problems, especially in the Middle East now, which is Palestinian problem. And I think this problem is not only political or military, it has become for a large population in Middle East emotional, sentimental problem. They cannot stand it to see day by day hundreds, sometimes thousands of children are killed.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to really consider that, the emotions of the people.
Yeah. Tell me this, Saudi Arabia and Iraq in recent years, not just politically but also economically, forging stronger ties, the UAE as well. The region seems to be behind a stronger Iraq, and that is a different narrative than perhaps we had heard in previous decades.
No, stronger Iraq is very important. Stronger Iraq, and Iraq, I'm glad to say, our relationship between all the Middle Eastern countries is good, and we are offering any help we can do, and at the same time we are encouraging rich Arab countries or rich individuals and Arab countries to invest in Iraq.
Baghdad's booming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not only Baghdad, Mosul, which was controlled by Daesh for a number of years,
mm-hmm.
and they destroyed already archaeology, historical buildings. Basra is booming. Many other governments are booming, and you have seen Suleimania, Arbil, which are really in a peaceful and harmless situation. But the effect of other conflicts definitely affect Iraqi situation. on economy, on trade, on exchange of visits, on delegations. These are all related to the conflicts.
In your mind, how does this square with the narrative externally that Iran is bad for Iraq? Because essentially what we've seen over the last couple of years is a more pro-Iranian government and a stable situation in the country.
To be quite honest, I think that's well over-exaggerated.
Yeah.
Because Iraqi people as a whole and Iranian people as a whole, they have lived all their history together.
Yeah.
And sometimes both countries were under the same empire.
Yeah.
There are friends and relatives in each country between. And they not only that, they depend on trade between each other. Sometimes, for instance, recently, Iranian helped us to use our power stations using Iranian gas.
Yes.
Apart from that, about large amount of water resources are coming from Iran to Iran.
Yes.
So we cannot close all these. Our relationship is good, and we want to keep it that way. And we hope that many other countries realize that. Now, I'm very glad to say that although we help a little bit, but the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran is improving.
Yes.
The relationship between Iran and UAE is good. And between the other countries, all the Arab countries are happy. But the conflict is not only in the Middle East.
Yes.
It's in Africa, in Sudan, in Yemen. Large populations are suffering from war and conflicts.
In your mind, did the conflict in Gaza actually propel more warm relations between regional countries? And I'm talking about Iraq, Iran, Saudi and Iran, UAE and Iran. Was it a catalyst?
No, I think that should be on our agenda. The agenda.
Yeah.
But we want really not good relations. We want a unity.
Yeah.
The region is strong with population, is strong with history, is strong with the number of religions, and it is strong in wealth.
Yeah.
As for agriculture, oil, natural resources are all available in the Middle East. So I think this area, if we have peaceful conditions and stability, I think it can easily be one of the richest area in the world.
And just to ask you about COP29, there's been a lot of controversy over the last couple of weeks at those meetings about whether they're going to be able to achieve a figure even of what developed countries owe the global south.
Well, environment is becoming a very serious. Climate change is becoming a very serious.
And it has direct implications for Iraq.
For everybody. Large number of countries in the world either suffer from flood or from drought or from lack of water. It's changing. Obviously, we cannot really continue using the same habit and the same behavior. We have to do something about it. And the sooner we tackle it, the better for everybody. Because just consider this here.
Yes.
How many countries suffer from flood? How many lives were lost as a result of flood? How much economical damage was caused by environmental change? So these are, we have to take it very seriously. And I'm a fully supporter of COP and their recommendations. And I hope that implementations will be implemented in every country, and every country should be responsible for implementing it. And we need the richer countries to make a program for supporting the environmental aspects and the climate change.
You're not worried that the COP process is broken?
No, I'm not worried. I think we have to do something about it. And I think it should be in our conscience and in our activity to do something about it.
Mr. President, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya.
Okay, thank you.
Guatemala. Adventure awaits at Guatemala. You can dare to explore the jungles or go on a canopy tour. The rainforests at Guatemala are perfect for thrill seekers to engage in many action-packed adventures. Guatemala is in fact known for its great outdoors. Its subtropical rainforests are protected, so people can enjoy nature-friendly activities such as hiking, biking, and horse riding. You can also hike up the Mayan pyramids. Tikal is a famous archaeological site hidden deep within the rainforest, where 70-meter or 230 feet high pyramids are seen through the canopies. It is a known UNESCO World Heritage Site that has more than 3,000 structures. And if a pyramid isn't enough for you, then you can also try hiking up an active volcano. Guatemala's Volcan Pacaya remains one of the most hiked volcanoes in the country. Molten lava slowly pours through its summit, creating huge dust and lava fields that admittedly create an impressive landscape. Also popular in Guatemala is the breathtaking Caribbean coast. You can reach it by boating along the Rio Dulce. It is a highly recommended trip as you'll get to experience a unique, isolated island feel. There, you'll arrive to hammocks and a rustic-themed beachside. Of course, you should go meet the locals. Explore the unique highlands region of western Guatemala, which is also known in Spanish as El Altiplano. Many of the modern-day indigenous Mayan groups reside there, and it's fantastic to listen to them speak in their native tongue. The locals retain the sacred rituals of their ancestors too, and you'll definitely enjoy the view of the great mountains and untouched beauty of the region's surroundings. Take a trip to the city proper. Although most tourists would rather skip the traffic-induced capital, you should still pay a visit. The place still has enticing gems yet to be discovered.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. While the world leaders debate the future state of the oceans during the latest COP event in Azerbaijan, my guest on this episode is a remarkable young man who's already making a major positive impact on the ocean environment. The Dutch entrepreneur Boyan Slat has been a CEO for over a decade. He's devoted more than half of his life to saving the planet from plastic, and yet he only recently reached the age of 30. Boyan's non-profit company, Ocean Cleanup, has been on an ambitious mission to rid the seas and rivers of plastic since 2013. It has invented technology that's transforming the pollution of our seas and rivers, and its work is saving wildlife, fisheries, tourism, and economies. Ocean Cleanup is also preventing plastic from entering the food chain and ultimately ending up on our own plates.
We can clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 10 years' time at a cost of $7.5 billion. So that's less than half of what America is spending on Halloween decorations on an annual basis.
In a wide-ranging conversation, we discussed how achievable Boyan's mission is today. Plus, I got a glimpse inside the mind of a driven and determined young innovator who entered the record books at just 14 after experimenting with rockets and explosives. Boyan, great to have a chance to have a chat. Now, many would argue you can't put a price on having clean oceans, but you've effectively done just that. You recently revealed your assessment of how long it will take to complete your mission to remove plastic from the seas and how much it will cost. Now, people might be surprised by the numbers, so tell me what you know.
Sure, yeah. So at the current level of performance, so basically what we have already achieved to date, we can clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 10 years' time at a cost of $7.5 billion. So that's less than half of what America is spending on Halloween decorations on an annual basis. Now, so I think, it's compared to a world problem, it's something that we should be able to afford. However, we were also looking to do it even faster and even cheaper. So by improving the way we detect where the highest concentrations of plastic are inside of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we think we can actually do it in just 5 years' time at a cost of $4 billion. So yeah, really now for the first time ever, we know what it will take to return the Pacific Ocean to its clean and pristine state.
That's a fascinating comparison, literally half of Halloween decorations in the US. But give me this perspective, because there are always skeptics out there. Why do you see this as value for money? What else could you get for that amount?
Yeah, so I think it's important to put it in the context of not cleaning the ocean, right? And according to a study done by Deloitte a couple of years ago, the plastic pollution problem as a whole is costing humanity up to $19 billion per year. And if you take into account all the ecosystem services that the ocean is providing, you're actually looking north of $500 billion in terms of harm that the pollution is doing to our ocean every year. So if you think in terms of ROI, it's way cheaper to clean the ocean than to not clean the ocean.
Let me ask you about this, because obviously there's a trail involved. How does plastic get from the factory to the ocean?
Yes, every year humanity uses roughly 400 million tons of plastic per year. During its use, it's providing a lot of value to humanity. It's a versatile material. It's an energy efficient material as well. But unfortunately, not all of that plastic gets collected and processed in a responsible way. So you'll have essentially leakage from the system, and some of that plastic is able to end up in our waterways, so in rivers in particular, and through rivers it then ends up in the ocean. So and we're talking about quite a small fraction, so less than 0.5% of the plastic that's being used ends up in rivers and flows into the ocean. But of course, that 0.5% is able to do a tremendous amount of harm to the environment, to coastal economies, and also to humanity in terms of the potential health risks of that plastic ending up in our food chain.
Isn't that amazing? It's such a small percentage, yet so important. We'll talk more about the important role of rivers in transporting plastic waste to the sea. Give us some idea of what happens when it gets there.
So once plastic is in the ocean, actually most of it only stays in the ocean for a relatively short time. So the majority will end up back on shore, on coastlines, washes up in a matter of weeks to months. And of course, that's still not a good thing, right? Because it damages tourism. Coastlines are also important ecosystems. But effectively, most of it removes itself from the ocean in a relatively short amount of time. But some plastic is able to make its way all the way to the open ocean, where if it does, it will end up in one of the 5 gyres. So that's an area where ocean currents converge, where plastic can enter, but it can never leave. And out of those 5 oceanic gyres that exist on Earth, the largest one is in the North Pacific. and that's also the most polluted one. So more than half of the world's plastic pollution that's stuck in the ocean can be found in that one, and that's, of course, the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Plastic accumulates in huge subtropic oceanic areas called gyres, massive circular currents that trap the plastic for decades, if not centuries. There are 5 gyres in our oceans. The most polluted and best studied is the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch, located in the North Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and California.
It's interesting, Sarge, explain for our viewers, gyre you mean by almost like a gyroscopic swirl of water, and the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is something that I remember discussing years ago. What is it? What would you want people to know about that, and what do you remember about encountering it for the first time?
Yeah, so it's so if we take the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is the largest accumulation of trash on Earth, this is an area that spans an area 3 times the size of France. It contains more than 100 million kilos of plastic. And what's really fascinating is to, when we take that plastic out and we look at the age of the plastic, we see that a lot of it is actually very old plastic, because again, once it's there to stay. It's stuck indefinitely until of course, it ends up in the stomach of a fish or whatnot. But in principle, it's there to stay for a very long time. So we even see stuff dating back to the 1960s that are still. We even had a Vietnam War drinking bottle from the U.S. Army that we found in still recognizable shape, still floating around out there in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So that really goes to show that why we have to go out there and clean it up. Sure, of course, it's essential to prevent more plastic from entering the ocean. But if that's the only thing we do, the ocean will be polluted forever, because those ocean garbage patches, they persist, and that's why I have to go out and clean this up.
Let's go back to rivers, and you'd mentioned a little bit about rivers playing, in terms of small percentage, but quite a high role, or quite an important role in all this. What are the numbers we should know about the pollution in rivers?
Yeah. So firstly, again, it's just a very small fraction of all the world's plastic that is being consumed that ends up in the ocean. And what's also fascinating is that those emissions are very concentrated in really just a small fraction of the world's rivers. So what we found in a study we published a few years ago is that just 1% of the world's rivers is responsible for roughly 80% of all the plastic that ends up in the ocean. So with a relatively sort of targeted intervention, intercepting the plastic in those 1% of the world's rivers, we can really stop most of the world's plastic emissions from polluting the ocean. Now, that 1% still accounts for 1,000 rivers, right? So it's still a big scope, but the good thing is that they are concentrated in a relatively small number of coastal cities, especially in middle-income countries. So Southeast Asia, West Africa, Latin America. Those are really the plastic pollution hotspots. So those are countries where there's now enough wealth to consume a lot of packaged goods wrapped in plastic, so you have a lot of waste generation, but where the infrastructure to then take care of that waste is really lacking. And just to give some more color to that, there's one river in Guatemala that we're operating in, where that one river is actually responsible for more plastic emissions to the oceans than all the developed countries combined. Just one river. So that's why we focus our work in those places where the problem is biggest, and where we can have essentially the biggest bang for our buck.
Boyan's interest, you could say obsession, with plastic waste in the seas was famously triggered by a scuba diving trip to Greece as a teenager. You'll know the expression, "I can't see the wood for the trees," Well, Boyan couldn't see the fish for the plastic bags, but he could see a problem and he had a vision to solve it. But his problem-solving appetite had begun at an even earlier age. I'd like to roll back the years and talk about the start of your incredible journey as someone who seemed, well, I guess, incredibly curious, driven and determined from a very early age. Your explorations involved explosives, launching rockets. At one point, you almost burnt down your family home.
Correct. Yeah. My mom didn't particularly like that phase. But yeah, I've always been very fascinated about technology and making things, building things, and so I've never been bored as a child, and always had my projects, right? So I had my own chemistry experiments, built my own computers. Actually, going all the way back, when I was 2, I used some wood and a hammer and nails to make my own chair. So always been had this urge to build and create. Indeed, when I was 12 or 13, I was really into some model rockets, and I decided to set a Guinness World Record by launching more than 200 of them at the same time. Again, not very useful, but it was just the way I kept myself busy. And sort of asking myself a question, what if I could do this? Could I have this idea? Could I make that happen? That's probably the thing I've always asked myself throughout my childhood. And it's also the type of question that I asked myself when I was 16 years old. When scuba diving in Greece, came across more plastic bags than fish. And I asked myself, why can't I clean this up? So I kind of see this as a continuation of my childhood.
Now, Boyan, a key moment in your journey was a TED Talk in which you laid out your ideas and it went viral. Tell me about that feedback you had from that TED Talk and the realization that there were people out there who did share your passion.
So please, don't tell me we can't clean this up together. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so at the time when I did that presentation, I was studying aerospace engineering at university here, and I had this idea. I had the opportunity to present that idea at this TEDx presentation. And a few months passed, and there wasn't really any traction. And at that point in time, I actually thought, okay, to give this idea any chance of success, I should probably drop out of university, dedicate all my time to this. And then again, few tough months followed. I approached 300 companies for help and sponsorship, and only one replied. And that person said, "This is a terrible idea. You should go back to school." So that was hard. But then suddenly there was some news blog that picked up the story, embedded the video of my presentation, and suddenly this blew up. And within no time, this video was watched, I think, over 1 million times. And that then allowed me to assemble an initial team, back then still volunteers, and also run a crowdfunding campaign to get the seed money to get started.
That crowdfunding campaign raised a staggering $2 million, with tens of thousands of donations from more than 150 countries. Ocean Cleanup was launched, but it would have to navigate through stormy weather on its voyage to save the seas.
It took us 8 years to finally have a system that worked. And throughout that time, we've had so many near-death experiences of almost running out of money, systems that broke down. I think we've done a few hundred prototype tests until we had something that worked. So it's so I remember vividly. We launched that new system. It was summer 2021. We deployed in the patch, and then actually the first tests, they didn't look very good. We were only collecting like a very small pile of trash, and it was just another one of those moments like where did we mess up? Why is it not working again this time? And then a few days later, we deployed the system again. We took the system back on deck. We emptied it out. And there was just this. So I woke up in the morning and I opened my phone and I see all these missed message calls and text messages. And I opened up my phone and I saw this photo of this massive mountain of plastic on deck. And that's definitely one of the biggest highlights. It's like almost like all of the pain of the 8 years was made it worth it for that brief moment when we finally knew we had a system that worked and that we could clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And by the way, it just turned out that we were in essentially sort of an empty part of the garbage patch in those first days. So we were essentially being fooled by the density of plastic. So that was a tremendous relief. And then of course we just got better and better to now the point that we can actually get the job done in just a couple of years' time.
I know you've been constantly working to improve your cleanup operation. I wonder how effective is the current system you have in contrast to your early attempts?
Yeah, so it's been a long journey to get to this point. It was 2018 when we launched our first system, which firstly didn't collect plastic, which was quite an important requirement for an ocean cleanup system. It also broke into two, which again was sort of as we like to refer to it as an unscheduled learning opportunity. So we learned a lot from those early days, early failures. But now fast forward to today, we have this massive 1.5 mile long cleanup system with which we can actually clean an area the size of a football field every 5 seconds. So it is tremendously effective. Now it's really about scaling it up. So we know it can be done. We have now given humans the tool we need to clean it up. But now it's really about who is willing to make it happen and fund the expansion to a whole fleet of systems with which we then are able to clean up the whole ocean.
That's fascinating, Boy. And so literally a football pitch in 5 seconds. But I guess when you're talking of a patch 3 times the size of France, that's a lot of football pitches.
Yes, yeah, exactly. We've had one system out there for the past 3 years doing all the testing and development work. And in that time, we've swept an area roughly the size of New Jersey. So, it does add up over time, of course, but to really clean up the ocean in 5 years' time, what you're going to need is a fleet of systems, roughly 20 of them, which is, and then once you have that, you can actually clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
I was blown away by when you said you'd found literally kind of old plastic, such as I think you said a plastic bottle from the Vietnam War in the garbage patch. So I wonder, what are some of the strangest things your team has recovered from the ocean?
Yeah, it's looking at our trash, it's like modern day archaeology. It's always super interesting to see what we collect. And we also post these on our social media, so definitely recommend to check that out. But it's everything. It's stuff ranging from mannequins to golf balls to AstroTurf, plastic toys, dolls' houses. It's wild to see what's out there.
It might seem likely that local and national governments would support efforts towards cleaner rivers, beaches and fisheries, but it's not always the case. What about the business world or plastic manufacturers? And what role do we have as consumers? I wanted to find out who's helping the Ocean Cleanup Project and who's not.
So when it comes to these ocean garbage patches, the issues that it's international waters, what's interesting is that, for example, if you look at the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we are able to link the plastic to the 5 big industrialized countries in the North Pacific. So I think there is a case to be made that they should step up and take at least some responsibility for this. When it comes to rivers, so what we do there is we put systems in those most polluting rivers to catch it before it can reach the ocean. We're currently already stopping about 2% of the emissions. We are in 16 rivers around the world and in 8 countries. But doing those first projects, it does take time to build up those relationships with governments, and I must say I've never really felt an unwillingness to support. Governments recognize that there is this problem, and they welcome the collaboration, and we support them. And in many places, they actually operate the interceptors, so that makes it financially sustainable on the long term as well. Right. But governments are just large and bureaucratic, so they are quite slow generally, right? So getting the permits to deploy, getting the contract secured, that usually is the limiting factor in how fast we can roll out our interceptor projects.
And yet it's an international problem. So how are global institutions like the United Nations helping you tackle it?
So we do have a partnership with the United Nations Development Program, who help open doors with those national governments. I think what's quite interesting, of course, we would welcome the support of the UN. And I think especially when you talk about the ocean garbage patches, it is an international problem, and this waste just travels, through many different countries and their waters, right? But what's interesting about the river problem is that you don't need any altruism, or you don't need any international cooperation to get this done, because actually, the biggest victim of the pollution that flows out of Indonesia's rivers is Indonesia, right? And the biggest victim of Panama's pollution is Panama, because most of that trash will stay in those coastal waters, will wash up on shore, and therefore there's just a selfish economic reason for these countries to step up and intercept that plastic before it goes into the ocean, which I think is a good thing, because international cooperation is notoriously difficult. So I do expect governments to be much faster in adopting what we do in rivers than international waters.
Boyan, how about a little finger pointing here? How about the business world? Are the plastic manufacturers searching for solutions, or are they actually continuing to add to the problem they help to create?
Yeah, well, at the Ocean Cleanup, we are about solutions. We don't point fingers. But at the same time, I think, be it governments, be it plastic producers, be it the companies that use the plastic that produce the packaging, the Coca-Colas of this world, and even the users of the plastic. I think everyone has played a role in creating this problem, and therefore I think everyone also should have the opportunity to really be part of the solution. So, I think if there's any industry that has benefited from all this cheap plastic and the production of it, they are the plastic producers and the companies that use it, and therefore I do think they should play a very big role in making this cleanup happen. And actually, the interesting thing is the cost of cleaning up the world's oceans is less than 1% of the net profits of the world's plastic producing companies over the course of the cleanup. So there's no doubt that they should be able to afford it. I think it's really about are they willing to step up and grab this opportunity.
It's interesting, it's I guess a very good approach not to point fingers, because you want to coerce them, or at least to convince them to come on board. Now, I was going to say, on the other hand, there is that opportunity for green investment and sponsorship, and saving the planet can be seen as a cool thing for a business to be doing. So how well are you benefiting from that?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think, I think if you forcing people to do things is generally not a very successful strategy. Indeed, I'd like to turn it around and say, this is like an Apollo project for Earth, right? This is something that in 50 years from now, children will be learning about in school, and they will be learning who helped make this thing happen. So I think it's it's something you should want to be part of. It's like extremely exciting adventure, and I think there's a huge reputational and also litigation risk associated with this problem. We're learning more and more every day about the health impacts that this plastic in the environment is doing. There is the harm it's doing to countries and ecosystems. I think if these companies want to be ahead of that game, I think they should have an interest in this problem, that this problem goes away. And at least I can't think of any sort of faster and cheaper way to make the problem go away than by intercepting this plastic in rivers to prevent it from going into the ocean, and by cleaning up the legacy pollution that's already in the ocean garbage patches.
And you know what's really nice, Boyan, is that it's not just a Western lens that's on this. I gather Kia, the car manufacturer, South Korean, is one of those that's very keen to get involved.
That's right, yeah. So we're very proud that Kia is actually one of the first companies that have stepped up, and with whom we have a partnership of significant size, where, of course, they contribute financially to enabling our work, but they also get access to the plastic we take out of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So there is actually some of this plastic will find its way back into the electric cars that Kia is producing. It's in our interest that our plastic doesn't. There's no risk that this stuff ends up back in the environment. So we want this to go into durable, sustainable products. And I think the Kia partnership is a great example of that. And another one is that we recently announced that the next vinyl record that Coldplay is releasing, that there will be an edition of that record that is made out of the plastic that we've taken out of rivers. So I think that's another sort of cool aspect of what we do, and it also allows us to for this story to reach more and more people.
I was wondering about that. Well, now you collected all that rubbish. What are you going to do, and how much economic value is there from recycling? And of course, I think Coldplay's been a big supporter for quite a while now as well, haven't they? And I gather you're making sunglasses, rather expensive sunglasses too.
Yeah, so we made these actually as a proof of concept. So this is 100% made out of the plastic we've collected from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Now we're not a sunglass company, right? So for us, it was really to prove to people that this is not rubbish. This is something you can actually make beautiful, useful things out. Of course, it's the economics of recycling generally are very challenging, right? It's because plastic is so cheap. It's very often cheaper to make stuff out of new plastic rather than reuse the plastic that already exists. However, of course, the thing that we add to the materials is the story value. So, Kia is willing to pay, the millions for that plastic, not because they are in need of plastic, but because they want to be able to tell that story when they, sell their electric cars, right? So it's so that way we think it does provide an extra way for companies that join our mission to talk about what they do with the ocean cleanup.
And it's a very powerful way as well. Now, let's ask you how we as individuals could be involved. What should we be doing to help resolve the plastic problem?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on where you live on Earth. So I think if you live in a sort of middle-income country, the issue is that waste collection is limited, and where the waste goes sometimes are illegal dumps, right? But it's, of course, it's very hard to do something about that as an individual. But of course, you can make sure that at least you pay for the waste collection, and that your waste gets collected rather than that you have to dump it. I think in richer countries, it's just there's not the risk that your plastic ends up in the environment, as long as you don't litter, is just so tiny that by basically the best thing you could do is actually support organizations like the Ocean Cleanup to address those interventions to the places where the problem actually is happening.
The Ocean Cleanup team has encountered plenty of doubters, skeptics and critics over the years, as well as praise and prizes for its work. I was keen to know what Boyan had taken on board from that feedback and how his current work may influence his future direction as he considers looking ahead to his role as a global influencer. I understand you receive a lot of messages from schools and individuals around the world. So tell me about some of those messages that might have moved you or inspired you.
It's been humbling to receive the amount of support we've received, of course, ranging from big corporations and billionaires that give us funding all the way to school children that write letters to us. And I think I'm a big believer in that when it comes to environmental problems in general, we're going to get out of this not by protesting or fighting against modernity, being against technology or business, etc., but rather to create solutions through which humanity can fulfill its needs and desires without having the negative side effects of destroying the environment. So I'm pro-environment, but I'm also pro-human, and I think if you're not, it's going to lead to solutions that are actually not solutions because humanity is going to reject them, and they're just not going to work. So, and I think what gives me a lot of hope is to see that that I get letters from young people that that decided not to glue themselves to the street or do that sort of approach to solving problems, but actually to channel that energy in a constructive way, to start projects, to start companies, to choose a certain study through which they can become an inventor and work on new forms of energy generation, and just naming some examples. So it's so it's I think many people there's a lot of pessimism in the world these days, especially amongst young people, and especially about the environment, and giving them hope that problems are nothing more than things that need to be solved. I think that motivates them to actually get to work on them rather than end up in despair.
How concerned are you about the effect of climate change on oceans in terms of rising tides and collapsing currents, which some people believe could actually lead to a new ice age in Europe?
Look, I think it's all about timescales, right? So I think when it comes to human timescales, I think some of these scenarios are still quite far away. But then if you look at the geological timescales, 100 years is nothing, right? And I would love to see humanity thrive, not just for the next 100 years, but for the next 100,000 years or 100 million years, right? So I think in that light, we do live, I think, in a very special slice of time where the Industrial Revolution is essentially yesterday on a geological timescale, right? And we still, and that has given us a tremendous amount of wealth, and I'm immensely grateful for those who came before me and created the modern world. But we haven't achieved technological maturity yet as a civilization. We still have the problems. We still haven't managed the side effects, when it comes to the pollution, the CO2 emissions, etc., that this modern civilization is creating. So I think I think that is a key challenge that we have in this century. And of course, if we don't solve it in this century, the longer you wait, the harder it is. So I think I don't think the world ends in 10 years. At the same time, I do think these are real problems, and I think we can solve them if we do what humanity is good at.
A lot of people would be interested to know the average age of a CEO among Fortune 500 companies is 57. Now, you came onto the scene with a bang, literally, as a teenager, and you recently turned 30, and you've already accomplished so much. So what else do you have in store for the world?
Actually, it's terrible turning 30 is, and it's like, I'm really starting to feel very old, actually. But
thanks, I'm double your age.
no offense. It's it's just it's just to me the ocean cleanup. I think plastic pollution is a huge problem, and I think it will be an immense victory for humanity if we are able to solve this problem that literally covering 2/3 of our planet. If we can send that to the history books, I think it's going to be huge, and that's what motivates me every day. At the same time, I hope that what we do at the Ocean can be essentially sort of a blueprint of how we solve problems in the 21st century. And of course, I hope that the Ocean Cleanup's goal is to help itself out of business. At some point in time, all these systems should be deployed, clean it up, and then at that point in time, I hope I have the opportunity to work on many other problems. There's not a shortage of ideas. It's really about having to focus now on this problem. But who knows? In a few years from now, I really hope I get to work on some other problems.
Isn't it ironic that your biggest success would be to put yourself out of business? That is interesting.
Yeah,
that you achieve it.
It was actually quite funny. Like I'm not aware of any other nonprofit that makes that explicit. While I think the majority of nonprofits, they are about solving a problem, right? So that should be their whole goal. Their whole reason to exist is to help yourself out of business. But so I really hope that more nonprofits should make that explicit.
Well, on the note of other people getting involved, another European CEO, Spotify's Daniel Ek, has put $1 billion of his own money into a startup fund to tech moonshots. Now, how much does it excite you when you see other tech-minded entrepreneurs seeking to solve global problems?
I think it's brilliant. And what's interesting, I think philanthropy has a unique, or I think entrepreneurs have a unique role to play because they are, they tend to be quite tolerant to risk. And I think what we, to have the greatest impact, you don't want to invest in the sort of safe bets because those things will happen anyway. I think what the Ocean Cleanup was when we started was really a sort of high risk, high reward opportunity where the chance of the Ocean Cleanup succeeding 10 years ago was super tiny. But of course, if we were to pull it off, it would have this huge impact. And I think we need more bets like that. Even if you just look at the energy problem, having very cost-effective and scalable energy storage, that's something that we don't have yet. Cost-effective ways of producing things like steel and cement in a way that doesn't cause pollution doesn't really exist yet. It's not cost-effective, at least. So I think to solve those things, what we need are those kind of bets that are sort of high risk, high rewards, and people like Daniel, they're in have an immense opportunity to support those things that governments tend not to do because it's still too early stage or too risky.
Well, a quick final thought then. Your ocean journey was triggered by the amount of plastic you saw in the sea while scuba diving in Greece. You touched on that briefly. Now, if you were to go back there today, or perhaps in 10 years, what difference do you hope or perhaps expect to see?
Yeah, I think saying about 5 to 7 years, I think all going well. And if we find the support that we need to now scale up the solutions, the solutions work. It's about scaling up now. But if we find those champions that are willing to help us make this scale, I think 5 to 7 years from now, is there any 16-year-old can go scuba diving anywhere on Earth and come across more fish than plastic bags.
Actually see the fish.
That's a future to look forward to, I think. Yeah.
Well, Boyan Slat, thank you so much. You may be the youngest guest. You are the youngest guest we've had on our show since we launched. But I think you have one of the most powerful messages. So more power to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
The remarkable Boyan Slat. It'll be fascinating to see what he does with his next 30 years on the planet. I'm Riz Khan from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burgess-Wilson. Coming up on today's programme, NATO says the use of a newly developed hypersonic ballistic missile by Russia does not change the course of the conflict in Ukraine. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un warns of a nuclear war, suggesting that talks with the United States have reached a dead end. International Criminal Court member states grapple with responding to the court's latest war crimes allegations against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which Israel calls absurd, Washington calls outrageous. And the veteran prosecutor Pam Bondi is President-elect Donald Trump's new pick for Attorney General, replacing Matt Gaetz, who stepped down amidst looming sexual allegations. Hello and welcome. We're going to begin with the rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine, where NATO has said that Moscow's use of an experimental missile will not deter its allies from supporting Ukraine or change the course of the conflict. Well, early on Thursday, Moscow launched a medium-range hypersonic ballistic missile called Oreshnik. It was launched on Dnipro in Ukraine. Well, the launch has stirred concerns of a wider conflict. Well, the missile that hit the Ukrainian city was initially thought to be an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, but was later downgraded to an IRBM, or interrange ballistic missile. Well, Oreshnik is thought to be able to strike Europe and parts of the United States. It can reportedly travel 10 times the speed of sound and carry nuclear warheads if needed. Well, the Kremlin says that it warned the US about the strike prior to the launch and justifies its use of this type of weapon on the grounds that the US is allowing Ukraine to use ATACMS to target Russia. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by the former NATO commander, Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, who joins us now from London. Dr. Parry, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Some are saying that Russia's use of a hypersonic ballistic missile in Dnipro carried some sort of a message. What do you think the message was, and who do you think was the intended recipient?
Well, there's no doubt that it's both a political and military message. I think we should clarify that pretty much all ballistic missiles are hypersonic because they come down very fast. The key point is that President Putin and the Russian regime is saying, look, I can do this on Dnipro, I can do it on any European capital or indeed some cities of the United States. And it's essentially political signaling, saying I can do this, I can do it at a time and place of my own choice, and it's up to you. He's engaged in a very high level, a game of poker at the moment, and he's trying to outbid essentially what the West is doing in supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, we've spoken to Ukrainians this week who've said that this is all a sort of a psychological dimension to the conflict. Would you agree with that?
There's no question about that. The fact that the Russians warned the Americans beforehand that this wasn't the start of either a nuclear or a mass conventional ballistic missile attack as an indicator of that signaling. It is performative, there's no question about that. Both sides right now in the conflict are trying to lock in their gains ahead of President Trump getting into the White House in January, and this is part of that pattern.
There are going to be some talks in Brussels on Tuesday, NATO-Ukraine talks. They're going to be talking about this Dnipro attack. How united and how resolute would you say that NATO is looking at this particular moment?
I think NATO as a whole is extremely united. I don't think there's any space between what the Americans and what the Europeans think. I mean, some of our European allies in NATO tend slightly towards sympathy towards Russia. But in that sense, I think in terms of common defense, NATO countries are absolutely united in opposition. I think any country in NATO can see what's happened to Ukraine. Thousands of missiles have been fired against civilian infrastructure, military targets, and also the civilian population. They don't want that happening in Western Europe. And anything they can do to deplete or indeed deter Russian capability is going to be welcome across the whole spectrum of membership, I would suggest.
We heard from the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, saying that if Russia is allowed to get away with this, i.e. Take large swathes of Ukraine without consequences, then, quote, it won't stop there. What do you think he's getting at here? Do you think Russia really does have territorial ambition beyond Ukraine?
And there's no doubt, if you look back at the Russian history of the last 100 years, they're particularly sensitive about the Baltic and the Black Seas, and part of their strategic purpose in taking over Crimea in 2014 and going into the eastern Donbass region in 2022 was really to try and dominate the Black Sea. They miscalculated in the Baltic, of course, because Sweden and Finland immediately joined NATO. And there's no doubt that should Russia either freeze the campaign in Ukraine through peace talks or indeed prevail in Ukraine, they will next turn their attention to the Baltic. And I suspect the Baltic states and Sweden and Finland will come under severe pressure. And there's no coincidence in the fact that the subsea cables between Finland and Sweden and Lithuania and Germany were cut this last week. That's a warning to them in advance that they might be next in the firing line.
And you were mentioning the advent of Donald Trump in just under 2 months from now. And I'm just wondering what you think NATO and NATO allies are trying to get done before he does take office. Because it does look, doesn't it, like they're sort of trying to get various things in order before he returns to the White House. And I'm just wondering what you think specifically they want to have set in stone before he does.
Well, I think President Biden has taken away one of the bargaining tools that President Trump could have used, and that is the extension of the use of these ATACMS and the Storm Shadow missiles from the United Kingdom. And so I think President Biden's dying regime is going to have to be very careful that it doesn't remove the very tools of persuasion that President Trump's administration afterwards will want to use in relation to Russia. I think one thing that we do need to be aware of is that Russia's economy next year will start to bite at the Russian people quite hard. If you look at inflation, you look at the unemployment levels, which are down because obviously they haven't got the manpower to service some of their industries. And you look at the interest rates, which are up at 23% at the moment, you can see that economic difficulties are coming pretty hard and fast for the Russian regime. If you have a significant drop in oil prices, for example, then that really will squeeze Russia very hard because they're sustaining the war very much on the export of oil right now, and that oil that is resold back to other countries.
Yeah, we understand that, in fact, Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, is paying a visit to Florida today to talk to Donald Trump. What do you imagine the nature of their conversation to be?
Well, I suspect that the Secretary General will want to say to President Trump, look, we heard what you said before you were elected president again. I appreciate that a lot of that was possibly performative for your internal audience. But here is the reality on the ground in Europe, and this is what it will mean for the United States. Therefore, we need to have a coordinated strategy here between the United States and the rest of NATO. Russia is a threat. There are not just threats to Ukraine, but to the broader European security structure. How can we work together will be, I think, the message.
You mentioned that Storm Shadow missiles have been used now in Russia by the Ukrainians. And we heard from the Russian ambassador to London, whose name is Andrei Kailin, who says that the UK is now directly involved as a consequence of that. Is your understanding, therefore, based on what the Russian ambassador to London has said, that Britain is now in a state of war with Russia?
Well, I'm in London. It doesn't feel like we're in a state of war with Russia. I'm afraid we're used to the Putin regime and its representatives huffing and puffing. You know, we don't scare easily in the United Kingdom, to tell you the truth. And we know this is performative. We're not directly involved in Ukraine. We are simply helping a democratic country that 2 years ago was attacked by an autocratic neighbour that has committed war crimes, that has devastated quite a lot of it. The country and shows no signs of showing any restraint.
So it sounds like you would dismiss the comments that were made to this channel by Sergei Markov, who is a spokesperson for Vladimir Putin, that British people could very well be spending their Christmases in bomb shelters.
Well, you know, we've been threatened by dictators before, and I'm afraid to say that the British people, when confronted by things like that, simply say, well, you know, we can do the same to you. Right now, you know, we have a ballistic missile submarine with 16 Trident missiles in the North Atlantic. If he wants to try our patience, I'm sure that both conventionally and in nuclear terms, we can outface a dictator like Putin and his regime.
The British Foreign Secretary David Lammy and his French counterpart Jean-Noël Barrot wrote in a newspaper piece together saying, "We will do everything necessary to help Ukraine combat Russia." How important do you see that partnership as being in this particular context?
The British and the French are probably the two leading military powers in Europe, so that counts a lot. But in these circumstances, words are really easy, aren't they? I think what we've got to notice is what is really being done on the ground in terms of actions and how well supported Ukraine feels. I think right now Ukraine feels it needs to get all the support it can get. The campaign at the moment is on a knife edge. I don't think Ukraine can win the war in terms of getting its territory back. Unless we stabilize the situation right now, Ukraine will continue to bleed and Russians will continue to throw Russian corpses at the problem. It's not a war we want in Europe, and it's disrupting both the economy and also the human rights of people throughout Europe if this conflict continues.
And all this comes at a time when the British government's talking about belt-tightening in the defence ministry. I mean, isn't that a cause for concern that the British government should be thinking about cutting expenditure or at least finding economies in the defence ministry at a time when it would appear their preparedness is more important than at any other time in perhaps recent memory?
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, during the Cold War, defence expenditure was 5.2% of GDP. It's barely 2% of GDP at the moment. And as you say, we had the announcement of some measures this week, which I have to say are largely rationalisation measures. And they don't deplete our capability that much, except in the case of a couple of Royal Navy tankers. The key point is that we need any savings invested in future capability and the latest technology. I have a suspicion at the moment there is a level of strategic illiteracy amongst this new government. They don't seem to be able to listen to the experts and they don't coordinate with our allies how best to deter aggression and coercion against ourselves and also against the members of the alliance.
And just lastly, I mean, supposing the Trump administration says this is a European problem, I'm talking about the conflict with Ukraine here, Europe can therefore deal with it on its own. Do you think Ukraine would be able to survive with purely European support, or do you think that's an unlikely scenario?
I think it's an unlikely scenario because I think President Trump and the people around him, some of whom I'm familiar with, will know that if that were to be said, then the whole NATO alliance would fracture. It's not possible to separate the security of the United States and Europe in the current circumstances. Their opponents are strategic players, there's no question about that can have global military influence. So if Europe isn't supporting the United States not supporting Europe, then President Putin will get what he wants for Christmas, and that is a fracturing of the NATO alliance. It's the most successful military political alliance in history, and it shouldn't be thrown away lightly.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time today, Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry. Thank you very much indeed. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is warning that the risk of nuclear war is growing, and he is blaming the United States for stoking the tensions. Well, Kim says that talks with the US are at a dead end because, he says, it's clear that their hostility won't change. Well, it's worth recalling that the US President-elect Donald Trump did meet with his North Korean counterpart during his first term in office. They met 3 times, although no concrete outcomes were achieved. Well, to discuss this matter further, we're joined now by Dennis Wilder, who is the former CIA Deputy Assistant Director for East Asia and the Pacific. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Al Arabiya News. North Korea is saying that the risk of nuclear war has never been greater, blames the United States for ramping up tensions. Is this just rhetoric, do you think?
Well, I think you have to put it into context. First of all, Kim is feeling emboldened by his new relationship with Putin. They signed a mutual defense treaty this summer. And so he feels he now has the kind of international support that he hasn't had in years. The Chinese really never gave him this kind of support. There are new reports today that Putin has given him long-range S-400 surface-to-air missiles. So some of this is posturing because he feels he can now that he has an important backer.
So you don't think the West should necessarily be too fearful of this latest rhetoric from Pyongyang?
I don't. And remember, he's also talking past Biden to Trump. So when he says that negotiations are at a dead end, what he's saying is that he was very frustrated by the Biden administration, by their diplomacy, and he's expecting something different from Trump. So I actually take this as a message to Trump that this situation is critical, but that he actually wants to see what Trump might do again with North Korea.
Yeah, of course, Donald Trump, one of very few world leaders to have shaken the hand of Kim Jong-un and set foot in his country even. I mean, what do you think the nature of their relationship is? And do you think that Donald Trump has what it takes to somehow hold some rational, meaningful conversations with Kim Jong-un during his second term in office?
Well, having negotiated with the North Koreans over decades, I can tell you that there is nothing more difficult than dealing with the North Koreans and dealing with Kim. However, I think Trump was creative the last time around. I think the Biden administration has been extremely uncreative in dealing with the North Koreans. And I think the North Korean leader would be intrigued by a new round of talks. Trump is transactional, and autocratic leaders appreciate that. He isn't particularly ideological. He isn't particularly interested in trying to convert the North Koreans to democracy. He just would like to see a better situation on the peninsula. So I think there's room here, but we'll just have to see.
So you're saying that there is something that can be built on from those ties dating back to the first Trump administration that can be built upon during the second administration?
Well, Trump keeps talking about the beautiful letters he received from Kim. In fact, he tried to keep them, much to the chagrin of the National Archives. But yes, I think that with Trump, he has a certain amount of rapport with autocratic leaders, for better or worse. So he felt he connected with Putin. He felt he connected with Xi Jinping. He felt he connected with Kim. So I think he would be inclined to trying again at some point.
You mentioned the defense pact between Pyongyang and Moscow. Obviously, ties between the two countries, Russia and North Korea, looking stronger now than they have done in several decades. And I'm just wondering what you think is in it for North Korea, having such strong ties at this particular moment.
Yes.
And obviously helping, I should add, Russia in its war effort in Ukraine.
Right. There's a huge amount in it for Kim. I've already talked about international stature. But the North Koreans have a very backward military other than these nuclear missiles. The Chinese have not been willing to help them with sensitive technology. Putin has all kinds of things that the North Koreans would love to have. For example, ballistic missile submarines, high-performance stealth fighter aircraft, tactical nuclear weapons technology, more technology to build ICBMs with multiple reentry vehicles. The list is long and scary. And frankly, on the U.S. side, people are very worried about what he might be getting, how this might embolden Kim. So Kim sending soldiers and artillery and drones, this is a small price for him to pay to get a high dividend if Putin is willing.
Yeah, the only thing we know for sure the North Koreans have received from the Russians was a shipment of zoo animals that arrived this week. I gather there was a lion, some bears, and some parrots that were delivered to Pyongyang Zoo by Russia this week. In terms of what difference...
You're ahead of me on that, Tom. I haven't read that intelligence.
Yeah, it's out there, and the pictures are there as well of some fine animals being delivered to Pyongyang. But I just want to ask you what sort of a difference you think the North Koreans are managing to make on the battlefield.
You know, 10,000 troops isn't going to make a significant difference, and frankly, North Korean troops aren't that special or elite that I think they will make a huge difference. I do think that they will get a great deal out of it going into combat, understanding modern warfare, modern drone warfare in a way you can only understand it on the battlefield. So I think their officers will get a lot. I would expect they'll rotate in units, that this will just be the first contingent, and they will get a great deal of learning off of this.
And of course, they're an extremely disciplined army. We've been looking at pictures of them goose-stepping on the screen as you've been talking. And they're also used to working in hostile climates. I mean, North Korea is extremely cold in the winter. I mean, do you think those two things will come into play and perhaps give the Russian troops an important boost?
I think in that way, yes. These will be elite troops of North Korea. We know they are part of what a unit is called Storm, which are basically, the old term for it was sappers, but special forces. And so they will be much better troops than the raw recruits that, and cannon fodder, frankly, that Putin has put into the front lines. So I would expect their performance on the battlefield to be higher than Russian troops.
What do you think China makes of all of this? Because, of course, China just this week has been calling not once but twice for restraint and calm in Ukraine, calling on all parties. China's never condemned the war, but having to walk a bit of a tightrope, isn't it, with the West and Russia? I'm just wondering whether perhaps there's scope for some friction between Beijing and Beijing and Moscow, having Russia now making use of North Korean soldiers in Ukraine.
Yes, I think you've put your finger on it. The Chinese have never commented on this new mutual defense pact between Russia and North Korea. They have not said a word in their media about the North Korean troops going to the Ukraine. In my discussions with Chinese officials, they're very nervous about all this. They don't have information. The Russians and the North Koreans are keeping information with them on the relationship. They're in fact asking us, what do we know? And so I think this lowers China's leverage with the North Koreans. That's a problem. The Chinese, while they don't mind having a bit of a threatening North Korea against Japan and South Korea, they don't want war. And they don't want Kim to get emboldened to the point that he starts a war. After all, the last time the North Koreans started a war, the Chinese lost 1 million men in combat. They do not want to be dragged into something on the Korean Peninsula.
No, they certainly don't want, I'd have thought, North Korea being handed sophisticated weaponry, especially weaponry that could give their own arsenal quite a significant boost.
Absolutely. I have, in fact, written, and I believe that this would be a good idea for the United States and intelligence channels to try and work with the Chinese on this question. I think they might be open to this.
So you're saying there's an opportunity here?
I see an opportunity in this situation.
And do you see it as an opportunity that the Trump administration is likely to seize?
I think they are more, shall we say, geopolitically realistic than the Biden administration, and therefore I do think they might seize the opportunity. There are opportunities to drive a wedge between Putin and Xi Jinping. Remember that there's a long history of the Russians, from the Chinese point of view, acting against their interests. In the 1950s, the Russians were very close to the Chinese, did a lot for them. But by 1960, that relationship had fallen apart. The Russians weren't willing to give the Chinese nuclear weapons technology. The new Russian leader, Khrushchev, did not have the kind of relationship with Mao. And they remember all of this. They feel a certain amount of Russian racism toward China. So I am not convinced that the Russia-China axis is invulnerable to our disruption.
Do you think that North Korea is a good ally for Russia to have in terms of Russia's own credibility on the world stage? Because, I mean, there aren't very many countries like North Korea in the world, are there?
No, I think there's a certain amount of desperation on the part of Putin. I think he's frustrated with his own soldiers. As I said, he's putting very raw recruits into the front lines, and they haven't performed well. So I think this is a bit of a Hail Mary by Putin to get North Korean troops into the front lines. So no, I don't think this helps Putin's position that much, but he doesn't have a lot of options either.
Okay, just lastly, with regards to the war in Ukraine, I'm just wondering whether you think that North Korea suddenly getting involved, and this is something that we've heard people saying this week, was perhaps something of a red line for some of the Western powers that support Ukraine, and therefore one of the reasons why permission was given rather late in the day, many would say, for advanced weaponry to be used by the Ukrainians. Do you see a connection here? Do you think that perhaps North Korea being involved was sort of the last straw for permission to be given for that kind of weaponry to be used in Ukraine?
I think that's not bad speculation. I would have to say that I was extremely disappointed in the way the Biden administration has acted on these issues. I think that it is irresponsible to have denied Ukraine these kinds of capabilities for, 2 years. If they had thought this was a good idea, they should have done it long ago. So I'm a bit confused by this decision-making process. It seems to me that we have been very slow to give the Ukrainians F-16s, tanks, and these long-range missile capabilities.
So it doesn't sound like you're seeing a particular connection with North Korea being a red line that perhaps prompted the Biden administration to make that decision.
I think the Biden administration has done this because they're worried that Trump will make a deal with Putin, and they're trying to put as much capability on the ground with the Ukrainians before Trump comes in as possible.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. Dennis Wilder, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for the invitation.
The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and also for his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Well, this news has triggered mixed reactions from around the world. The Biden administration in Washington called it outrageous. Israel has called it absurd. Well, in Europe, Germany says it is working on a response. Meanwhile, Europe's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, insists that the ICC decision must be respected. Meanwhile, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has taken a different position, saying that Netanyahu is welcome in his country. Well, for more, we can speak now to Sir Stephen O'Brien, former UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, who joins us from the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us, Sir Stephen. Let's start by talking about this ICC warrant. It says that Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant committed crimes against humanity and war crimes. Do you agree with this decision to issue this warrant? And have they, in your view, committed the crimes of which they're accused?
Well, speaking from the United Kingdom, which is a signatory to the treaties that set up the ICC, obviously we recognise as the United Kingdom, I don't speak for the government, but that the ICC has both legitimacy and a standing in world affairs. It's a court which is wholly independent of member states and member state influence and is entitled to examine any kind of charges or accusations made to it and information brought to its attention, and then it carries out its own investigation. And it issues warrants for the arrest where it believes there is sufficient evidence of a potential crime under the international rules. So at that stage, any one of us is not in a position to say whether or not we agree with whether they should issue a warrant. It's under their independent processes they have decided to. The question then is, what does that mean for those who are under that risk of arrest, in order to bring them to a point of being questioned and tried with a view to whether or not the prosecutors will be able to secure any kind of finding of the alleged crimes. So it's at the level of allegation at the moment. It is not by any means any question of proof. So it's a matter of process. So at this stage, I think that those of us who find ourselves either subject to or in jurisdictions where we are signatories to the ICC, I don't think we have any opportunity to have an opinion other than to say the court is doing its work and it must be respected.
Indeed. I mean, it seems to have put some leaders in a tricky position. I mean, just to, since we're talking about the UK, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, saying the UK respects the independence of the ICC. I mean, not going beyond that and not saying that Benjamin Netanyahu would potentially be placed under arrest were he to arrive in the UK.
Well, I haven't heard. I've heard some reports that maybe the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has said that there would be a respect for the warrant for the arrests. What that normally means is that if somebody sets foot in a jurisdiction which is a signatory to the treaties that set up the ICC, they would have certain international legal obligations to effect an arrest on behalf of the ICC. So clearly the UK, as part of that, has that. Now we have a difficulty because we all want to see the same standards applied in any case of the ICC, and have been in the past arrest warrants issued against people for whom we would, none of us, I think, have any quibble whatever. And so I think to apply this consistently is important, even though I think that it is, in this case, very, very difficult because of the conflict of approaches between those who wish to see the international rules-based system respected, that any country living securely within its borders, particularly a democracy, should have the right to defend its citizens against foreign and exterior attacks, which is exactly what Israel has been saying that it's been doing. At the same time, there has been this difficulty in international law of proportionality not necessarily being part of the consideration. So this is a tricky area, whereas it's much easier to identify the sense of potential justice when you look at someone like Putin going as an aggressor over a border as a state against Ukraine, which is another independent state. There you can see how that is much more obvious. So that's why there is this big debate. But I think that in terms of process, those who signed up to the ICC, which America hasn't, would need to respect the fact that the warrant has been issued, and there are certainly legal obligations that flow from that.
Yeah, yesterday I interviewed somebody in Israel who described the ICC as a kangaroo court, and obviously Israel has been extremely dismissive of these accusations levelled against Prime Minister Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. How much support do you think there is for the ICC around the world? Do you think it's a sort of obviously the countries that have signed up to it, not all of them seem to agree with this decision to accuse those two men of war crimes. Do you think that there is a huge split in the world between those who think the court has legitimacy and those that don't?
Well, yes, it is patchy because not everybody has signed up to it. I mean, I do remember, I happen to have been in the House of Commons as a member of Parliament in the shadow teams at the time, when the question about ratifying our membership of the ICC treaties came up. And of course, there was a big debate about whether we should do that if America was not going to do that. In the end, it was decided that the UK would. But others, such as the United States, have not. It has also meant that when we've had others who've had arrest warrants issued against them, such as the former president of Sudan, for instance, that has restricted their travel, as it has done for Putin. But it's not prevented Putin, for instance, of traveling to South Africa not so long ago, and he wasn't arrested. So there are these inconsistent approaches, and the ICC, which is, as I say, totally independent, it sort of sits in a relationship with the United Nations, but the United Nations Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is associated with that, whilst there is a reference and a read across to the ICC, there is also a degree of independence. And at the moment, there is a struggle going on, and there's a big debate, which I'm sure you and your viewers are deeply aware of, about the question about whether the rules-based system that was established internationally in the middle of the last century, which has served us pretty well, but has been honoured often in the breach, and then there's been a massive diplomatic effort to try and pull things back from potential conflicts, and it has certainly not stopped conflicts, and recently it's been held in less regard than ever, and its leadership has been called into question. And I think that that is all very fair, and I think we have a tussle at the moment. It's about whether the established international rules, which I think we are all living by, and it's very, very important. In my view, I think they are there to be defended and upheld. But there are others who do not believe that and think that it's time to move on to a different approach.
I want to ask you about the humanitarian situation in Gaza in just a moment, for your reading of it. But just one more question on the issue of this ICC ruling, because an arrest warrant was also issued for Mohammed Deif, who is the head of the military wing of Hamas, who's actually believed by many actually to be dead. And I'm just wondering what you think the point is of issuing an arrest warrant for him, if indeed he's no longer alive. Is there some symbolism, do you think, in that?
Well, I think that if the ICC have done whatever investigations they've done in the light of information being provided to them and complaints being made to them, has given them grounds that there is sufficient evidence for them to justify an arrest warrant for anybody for alleged commission of international war crimes, then that would be important that they do then issue that warrant for arrest, because that's the nature of what exactly their purpose is. And unless there is proof of death of a person, then the presumption has to be that they are alive until otherwise proven. I understand that at the moment the proof of death of the former Hamas leading operative has not been made. So that's why I suspect the ICC has decided to proceed. I imagine it has to be evidence-based. I think the implication behind perhaps your question is, was that done in order to show some kind of balance? Well, I don't believe that that could be the right consideration for the ICC. I think they have to be very much what they regard as relevant, applicable, available, admissible evidence-led that gives them grounds to believe that there is a justification for those warrants against those individuals, and you will have to issue them if unless you know that the person is dead. If once it's clear that person is dead, if that is the case, then that warrant would have to fall away, because obviously there's no way of taking it further.
Now, turning our attention to Gaza itself, we're 13 months into the war. 44,056 people have been killed, which is about 36 times the number of people who were killed on the 7th of October. And just talking about Hamas and its leadership there, I mean, yes, indeed, a number of them have been killed, but it seems the group is still highly active, and there's a lot of violence and fighting around Beit Lahia in the north of Gaza right now. Why do you think diplomacy has seemingly yielded so few results in bringing this conflict to an end?
Well, like you, I mean, those numbers are absolutely horrifying in terms of the loss of life and the oppression. I think it is not quite appropriate, however much people wish to do so. I don't think it's appropriate in terms of the international diplomatic and legal arrangements to talk about a sort of equivalence between whether or not the number of killed on one side bears relationship to the number killed on another side. This is more to do with the ability of, under the rules that we would expect for borders to be secure, and within that democracies in particular, but also any government, to be able to have the right to defend their citizens and their territory from outside attack, and particularly from non-state actors. And the attack by Hamas on October the 7th, over a year ago, was such an act which required a response under the international rules to defend Israeli territory. So I've been both as horrified as anybody else about the terrible loss of life, the grave, grave difficulty in the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and more recently also in Lebanon, as the conflict has spread to the engagement with Hezbollah. And I think there is a need to try and revitalize what has been in my opinion, tremendously benign efforts by Qatar in particular, supported by Egypt, who clearly have a clear interest in being part of the southern border of the Gaza Strip, where there were all those tunnels and the difficulties about people and movements, both vehicular and people, into Gaza and out of Gaza. But Qatar acting very much as an objective dialogue and understanding builder to try and find a way to ease the quite important recognition that a state has a right to defend its borders and its citizens. So that was going very well until very recently, when Qatar has felt compelled to withdraw from that engagement, partly because they were not getting the support they needed from other players. I don't know the inside story on that, but yeah, it is clear that they would have pursued it for as long as they felt there was any kind of possibility. So at the moment, there is an absence of any kind of dialogue that could lead to a cessation of hostilities and peace. There have been a few interruptions in order to get some vaccines delivered, very importantly, and occasional humanitarian deliveries, but clearly not enough. And it's a dire situation. But Israel is determined through its forces to pursue the terrorists, to make sure that the threat is removed for any kind of future hostility across into their borders and their territory. So at the moment, the international community, particularly the UN, is not in a position, and it seems unwilling to take the rather higher risk of trying to prevent it.
And would your assessment be that it's unlikely that we'll see any breakthroughs now, given that there are just less than 2 months left of the Biden administration, and that this is probably going to have to wait until Donald Trump is installed at the White House again?
Well, I wouldn't put it quite as starkly as that. I think that the fact that Donald Trump is now the president-elect for a second term as president is having a big influence on people anticipating what may be the direction that he will wish to take and the measures he will wish to seek to apply to either bring about peace, which is what he's declared, that he can do in a day, but we don't know how he thinks that can happen. And of course, the Biden administration is still very much got the levers of power at the moment, notwithstanding the influence of knowing that will come to an end in a couple of months' time. So they still have opportunities to take decisions and to make big strategic decisions. Their steadfast support of Israel, I don't think, is in doubt. So I think that the question for us is what brings it about best. And there will be a lot of people below the leadership. I mean, of course, at the end of the day, politicians take the decisions and they set policy. But there will be huge numbers of people in the State Department and other departments of the United States administration under the current Democrat-led regime, as well as anticipating what will happen when Donald Trump comes to the presidency again, as there is no doubt in the Foreign Office here in the United Kingdom and in all the foreign ministries who are taking an interest in this around the world. They will be working feverishly to try and find another way forward. And I very much hope might be in a position to re-engage Qatar and its good offices in trying to forge some form of at least temporary cessation of hostilities to give us the space to try and find a way of securing the interests of Israel's citizens, which is ultimately what this is about, against the stated intent of terrorists who wish to remove that security. And that ultimately is what's got to be achieved before we can hope for there to be a peace.
And just lastly, I mean, obviously the UN Security Council had a vote earlier on this week. 14 of the 15 council members voted in favor of this draft resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza. One obviously vetoed it, which was the United States. Do you think the United States is starting to look really quite isolated on the world stage with its unconditional, it would seem, support for Israel in a forum like the UN Security Council?
Well, Tom, I wouldn't say it's starting to. I mean, it has always held a very individual and completely uncompromising approach to its support for the state of Israel and for the decisions of the successive governments of Israel in making sure that the people of Israel are secure behind their borders and in the country which the international community made sure was created for the Israelis, for the Jewish state to exist not long after the Second World War. So that has been a big international commitment. The US is absolutely determined we should all stand by. And therefore, when you look at the Security Council, which is charged with the responsibility at the highest diplomatic level of trying to secure peace and security across the world, I think under the current position, and particularly in the way that it's been approached by both the Secretary General as well as the Security Council, I think it's been somewhat less influential and less potent than in previous times. But nonetheless, there has been a difficulty because with the veto, which I have no idea would ever be changed. I can't see what incentive there is for the 5 veto members, including ourselves in the United Kingdom, to give up the veto. And so therefore, you have to build a coalition of consent. And clearly, for as long as the United States perceives that there is an absence of recognition that the State of Israel has a right to defend itself from extraneous attacks, and particularly from those who would wish to see the removal of Israel and the destruction of the state and its people, and who have any kind of sympathy for any of that sentiment of phrases which we all know are now regarded as being very hostile, indeed incitement to hatred. We need to make sure that the compromises that are necessary in UN resolutions come to recognize that the United States is not prepared to compromise on the fundamental right that Israel has a right to defend itself as prescribed by the very UN Charter, which is the terms of reference under which the Security Council itself sits. So that's where the impasse lies, and I think it needs a much more subtle and sensitive approach to the drafting of a resolution so that the United States can find a way to support it, rather than everybody just assume that the United States is in the wrong, which they do have the United Nations Charter and its terms on its side.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. So, Stephen O'Brien, thank you very much for your time. The US President-elect Donald Trump has announced that the former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi is his new pick to lead the Department of Justice. Well, Bondi represented him at his first impeachment trial at the Senate in 2019. Well, all this follows on from the withdrawal of ex-Congressman Matt Gaetz, who withdrew 8 days after being named for the role. Well, Bondi and Trump share a years-long political history. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Frank Figliuzzi, who is a former Assistant Director of the FBI and an NBC News Senior National Security Analyst. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us, Frank. Obviously, Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his name from consideration. I just want to ask you for your reading as to why he's had to do that.
Well, look, there's a number of variables here that combine to have caused this to happen. First, he is not well liked, even by his Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives. Number one, he's seen as someone who just causes chaos within the House, so that didn't help him. Number two, this pending ethics investigation, which came to a halt when he recently resigned from Congress to take a job as Attorney General, or at least to pursue the job. He was under serious ethics investigation for having sexual relations allegedly with underage girls, multiple underage girls, and allegedly paying directly or indirectly for those sexual services. And reportedly, this ethics investigation in Congress was going to be damning. It might have even resulted in calls for him to resign. So we have here a line that apparently we've hit, which is, even when we have very unqualified people, there's a line. And the line seems to be, you can't be under serious investigation for sex with minors, money laundering, paying for sex, interstate transportation of minors for sex. You can't do that and be the Attorney General of the United States.
Okay, well, we should be clear that he denies all of these allegations. I mean, do you think the evidence against him is strong? How much of it has come to light?
There's multiple witnesses in this investigation. So there's been both an FBI, Department of Justice criminal inquiry, which actually was closed on him without moving forward with charges. A close friend of his is in prison for these very same allegations, by the way, and setting up these sexual transactions. And then separately, there was this ethics investigation pending in Congress, and it's starting to leak out. We're getting pieces and a window into this, and it is quite serious. It's more serious than many people thought in terms of the money he was paying, in terms of the number of times he may have had sex allegedly with a minor. So we don't know the extent of it. And perhaps we will never know if Matt Gaetz simply goes away.
I want to talk to you a bit more about the vetting process in just a moment. Before we do that, I mean, what you said is that some in the ranks of the Republicans are probably secretly breathing a sigh of relief that Matt Gaetz is no longer the nominee. Obviously a bit of a blow, though, for Donald Trump. Do you think there was a sense that perhaps this was becoming just too much of a distraction?
Well, for certain, it was going to drag down the nomination process and split up the Republican Party within Congress. And I think they've made the right call here to withdraw Gaetz's name. But look, this is not the only problematic nominee. We have issues across the country with some of these picks that for the highest places, the highest roles in government, including Director of National Intelligence. The Secretary of Defense nominee, Peter Hegseth, has serious sexual assault allegations. So Trump is, I think, in an effort to pick loyalists who will do whatever he says, he's willing to look the other way on really troubling backgrounds on these folks. And by the way, backgrounds that are not being investigated and vetted by the FBI because Donald Trump, unlike any other president, has chosen to bypass the standard FBI investigations, which would uncover all of this problematic threat and risk material.
Yeah, I should add that Pete Hegseth also denies those sexual assault allegations. Just going back to those FBI background checks, I mean, what you're saying is that they aren't actually compulsory.
I think it's been an eye-opening process for many Americans to see what aspects of our government we've taken for granted, we've assumed are mandated by law, and what are not. And as I have researched, a mandate for FBI background investigations on national security nominees is not law, but rather exists in a number of government documents, including what's called executive orders that date back to President Dwight Eisenhower. And then there's memoranda of understanding between the White House and DOJ, between the Senate and DOJ, that come all the way to present time. And what the intent there is clearly is that a government background investigation has to happen if you're going to get a security clearance. And all of these high-level nominees require security clearances. The intent is for the FBI and other government agencies to conduct those investigations. Yet we have Donald Trump thumbing his nose at this long-standing protocol and practice. Why? Number one, I don't think he trusts the FBI. Two, he thinks his nominees have so much baggage that they would never meet the standards for a national security clearance.
Knowing, as you do, better than anyone else I can think of, how the FBI operates, just help our viewers understand someone in a much less senior position in government office would be subject, would they not, to extremely intense vetting and background checks carried out by the FBI, and therefore you'd have thought the future Attorney General as well.
So you're absolutely right. Even at any level, even at the least senior levels of government, everyone gets a form of background investigation. And as you get into the secret and top secret security clearance area, you're getting an intensive, often year-long background investigation to determine, number one, your qualifications and competency, your reputation, your trustworthiness, your loyalty to the United States, whether you might have foreign entanglements that cause concerns for national security. That happens even for the person who's pouring coffee in the coffee shop at FBI headquarters in Washington. They're getting that full-blown inquiry, and we're not getting it for people like Attorney General of the United States.
I'd imagine your former colleagues at the FBI are quite confused. They're probably scratching their heads and probably feeling a little bit worried because, you know, the word that's being used to describe a lot of these nominees is disruptors. And that suggests that they've got quite big plans for shaking things up. I mean, do you think there are plans to carry out pretty major reforms at the FBI or even dismantle it altogether?
We do expect in the United States, all of us, through some really good media reporting, we're getting insights into the plans, and they are extensive and also troubling at the same time. So this concept of disruptor, nothing wrong with shaking up bureaucracy, absolutely. But disruptor should not become destroyer. And that's where the concern is, that people seem intent on destroying the very institutions that embody America's values, the rule of law, the Constitution, 3 equal branches of government. That's going to be absolutely challenged in the months and years ahead. And for the FBI, my agency, where I spent 25 years before I retired, the talk is that we're going to see not only the FBI director fired, which, by the way, again, is a disruption, because the FBI director is supposed to serve a 10-year term to straddle politics and not be political, and to straddle presidential administrations. He's likely to be fired, but worse than that, they're talking about replacing the entire top echelon of the FBI, not with career agent professionals, but rather with people who are loyal to Donald Trump. And the greatest concern there would be not only that they don't know what they're doing, but also that they're willing to pursue Trump's enemies with guns and badges and use the justice process to really commit injustice.
Okay, well, turning our attention to someone who does seem to have the right qualifications, at least more so than Matt Gaetz. I want to talk to you a little bit about Pam Bondi, who has now been named as the person who's going to head up the Justice Department. Do you think it's likely she'll be confirmed easily, and do you think she has what it takes?
So it's interesting. We seem here in America to be so relieved that someone like Matt Gaetz has withdrawn from consideration, that I think what happens by human nature is we're more willing to embrace the next person who has less baggage. So there's good news and there's bad news. The good news with Pam Bondi is, look, she served as Attorney General for the state of Florida, a huge state here. So that's not nothing. And in terms of qualifications, prior to that, she was actually a prosecutor at a county level in Florida. She's been a real attorney. She understands making senior legal decisions. That's good news. Bad news, she seems intensely loyal to Donald Trump. And the question will be, from some statements she is making about pursuing people who investigated Trump as part of their job, concerns me that her loyalty could be more to Donald Trump than to the Constitution. And as Attorney General, remember, your client is not the president. Your client is the American people and the Constitution.
She was named quite quickly after Gaetz withdrew from the nomination process. I'm just wondering whether your experience of covering elections and transition teams, is it quite typical that there'll be some plans B and C in place for situations just like this one?
Very traditional and typical for a president-elect to have a short list that he's willing to go to. This appears to be the number 2 choice. I hate to mention the reality here that Pam Bondi must be having some thoughts about the fact that she was second choice to a man who's who's been investigated for having sex with minors. But there she is. I will also point out, by the way, that Trump has named 2 other lawyers to serve possibly as the number 2 and number 3 at the Department of Justice, critical positions. They both have served as criminal defense attorneys in some capacity for Donald Trump, as has Pam Bondi. The good news there is that they are real serious lawyers. And I have confidence that they understand what DOJ is all about. But it is worth noting that we're looking at a scenario where the top 3 people at the U.S. Department of Justice have all potentially served as Trump's criminal defense attorneys.
Okay, yeah, so it's there are those who are saying that some of these appointments are rewards for loyalty, but that's something that's quite standard as in US politics, that an incoming administration would be filled with friendly faces and people who've, in the eyes of the incumbent president, earned the loyalty of the incumbent leader. I mean, is it really so unusual that this should be happening?
There's no question, politicians being who they are, they want to surround themselves with people they trust. But I would say what separates this current scenario is the lack of serious qualifications that some of these people have. Historically in the United States, particularly the Attorney General position has been viewed as something that has to stay sacrosanct, has to stay separate from politics and the White House. Similarly, with the FBI, Secretary of Defense should require the ability and the experience of literally running an organization of millions of employees in the Department of Defense. It's the largest employer in the U.S. government. So if you come in as a TV host, which is actually what Hegseth is, never having run a team of more than, I don't know, 4 or 5 people on your TV show, and now we're going to ask you to run up to 3 million people in your organization, I question whether that makes you qualified.
You have a role as a TV personality. I'm just wondering whether you think perhaps some of the skills associated with presenting on television and communicating to an audience are in fact quite legitimately transferable to jobs like the ones we've been talking about.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. Trump has been very focused. And remember, Donald Trump himself is a TV star from a popular show called The Apprentice. And yes, he watches a lot of TV himself, particularly Fox News. So he's very focused on optics, appearances, and communication skills. He thinks that's gotten him where he is. And let's be realistic. He does seem to resonate with about half of the American population. And he does that through whatever form of charisma and communication he may have. And he's finding those skill sets. For example, Pam Bondi, yes, she's been Attorney General of Florida, but she has served as a media spokesperson when she was a prosecutor for her prosecutive agency. She has been on Fox News, even guest hosted on Fox News. So, you know, he's very concerned about appearances and communication skills. It's worked for him.
Yeah, it has, because that's, you know, one of the things that perhaps the Democrats didn't get right during the campaign. I mean, clearly some communications issues on the part of Team Harris that could have been overlooked. Just lastly, I want to ask you, you know, the fact that we've already had one Attorney General pull out and someone else put in, whether we're looking at a repeat of some of what we saw in the first Trump presidency, which was quite high turnover. You know, there was more than one Secretary of State, there was more than one Attorney General. I mean, do you think the second Trump presidency is going to have a similar level of turnover, or would you think that perhaps lessons were learnt and perhaps if once the nomination process is over, we're going to have a little bit more stability than we did in the first team?
Well, yeah, I think so. Stability is a good thing, but why we might have stability could be problematic. And by that, I mean, you're right. Donald Trump had a lot of his top people walk away from him in his first administration because they were concerned about the ethics of their scenario, what they were being asked to do. They walked from Secretary of State and on and on and on. And I think what that means for Trump now is he's desperately seeking more loyal people to him and his cause, and less concerned about people being driven by ethics, integrity, the rule of law, that they're willing to stay around for the Trump cause. And I think that's what we're seeing in some of these selections. If I had to predict the person that might first run into an ethical dilemma, I would say that might be Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. He's a solid, experienced senator. He has chaired the Senate Intelligence Committee. He knows foreign affairs. He's been on that committee. And I think he's a pro. And I think we could be watching his relationship with Trump very carefully to see if he can hang in there as long as Trump wants him to.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Frank Figliuzzi, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again on Monday for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.
Arabian News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Al Arabiya News. I'm your host, Michal Prendergast. I'm thrilled to say I'm joined by the star of Shark Tank USA and millionaire investor, Kevin O'Leary. So Kevin, the world has been shocked about the return of Donald Trump. Are you shocked?
No. The Democratic Party lost its way. They're no longer in touch with the electorate. There was a certain arrogance they had, and I think the problem started when Biden left the ticket, because in the democratic process, usually you have a convention, and so you start from scratch, and that process weeds out any weakness in candidates. If they have an inability to articulate their position, for example, or they're not able to debate their colleagues or whatever. But the other advantage of the convention, and there's been many very famous conventions back as far as the 40s, 50s, and 60s, is that the party realigns itself with a new message because it's trying to figure out what's the best candidate for the times. And they also get a tremendous amount of press, almost 5-6 weeks of press. That's not what happened here. What occurred was, I don't know if you want to call them the party elite, but the Pelosi's, the Schumers, the Obama,
the deep
even
state,
some movie stars, you know, they said, well, we're going to anoint Harris. And that was a mistake because Harris, well, a very fine person, I'm sure, has never won anything. And last time she tried this, she didn't get a single delegate. So in 2020, in 2019, she failed. 2020, she failed again in 2024. The analogy I think that is best serving this thing is the Super Bowl of all political contests on earth is the American presidential election. There's no greater political event on earth. And if your quarterback gets injured, which is what Biden was, you don't put in a new quarterback that's never played a game or ever won one, ever. They got shellacked, and they've learned an important lesson. I looked at that map, the electoral map, while covering the election. It was turning redder than a lobster being boiled. I mean, he just took the nation. And I think they're doing a little soul searching now. But they had it coming to them. And as I like to say, Trump did them a huge favor. He actually helped that party. They don't know it yet, but they're going to have to take a spatula to it and scrape all of those candidates away and start from scratch with new leadership. They'll be a very competitive party. There's a lot of talent in the Democratic Party that never got a chance to compete. Now they will.
Yeah, and speaking of Donald Trump, I've heard you say every Democrat has to thank him for saving American entrepreneurship and the American economy.
Yeah, the concept, some of the ideas being proposed, specifically taxing unrealized gains, that's un-American. The idea of price controls, Soviet-style price controls, that's un-American. The focus on gender identity was not the #1 concern of people that can't even afford chicken on their kitchen table. So when you get that lost, the system corrects itself, and that's exactly what happened. That's the amazing thing about democracy. When you try and stretch it too far in any direction, boom, it self-corrects. Now, you happen to be in the way of the self-correction, you get decimated, and that's what happened to that party.
Yes, and the effect of social media has been really interesting. Obviously, Elon Musk has played a huge part. Obviously, he paid $44 billion. Do you see that as a good investment in the future of free speech?
Well, as an investment, it wasn't a good investment because it's valued now at 11 to 12 billion. But that doesn't matter. What he did do is keep alive the concept of free speech, because in a democracy, you're always dealing with 2.5% lunatic fringe. The cost of freedom of speech is the lunatic fringe. The minute you try and shut down the lunatic fringe, you're moving away from the concept freedom of speech. Everybody has a voice. You may not like what they say, but because they're part of the narrative, that is the core and the DNA of democracy. And so many ideas get tested, some get thrown out. And when you try and change that, again, the system self-corrects, and that's what happened here. So it's a very divided country now. We are going to have a new president with a full mandate. I mean, it looks like he's going to win the Senate and the House and the presidency. You can get a lot done for the first 2 years when you control everything. And so that's what's going to happen.
And obviously Trump in his first 4 years, it might have been called a little inexperienced. I think this time he won't mess around.
Well, he's actually signaled the market that he intends to hire seasoned veterans, AAA players, that don't have a mandate to go in the White House and write a book 6 weeks later after they're fired. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want a rotating door anymore. He wants A players, and he's grooming his, he's got some very interesting people working on the inside to find the right people for every single position in cabinet. And I think it's going to be a fantastic government, because it's going to focus on what the people want. They want security at the border. They've already said that. They want a reduction in inflation. The way you do that is you reduce energy costs. They want to strip away all the regulatory environment that the Biden administration put on. $1 trillion worth of burdensome regulation. He will tear that off like a Band-Aid, rip it right off, and the economy, as you can see, indexed by the market, the buoyancy that happened as soon as they figured out that he was going to be president, was pretty happy with that outcome. This is good for business. And when the economy is buoyant and people are getting employed, it's good for everybody. So, you know, the Democrats are licking their wounds, but in 6 weeks, everybody forget about it, and we'll move on. It'll be a great thing for everybody. I think the U.S. is in a renaissance period. And I'm not really shilling for politicians. I never do that. I shill for policy. I care about policy. I care about entrepreneurship. I care about investing. I care about the American dream. I'm an ambassador for it. I want that to work, because my family, you know, is American, and they're working in the U.S. I want the best we can get for that country every day, and this is how you do it.
And speaking in terms of efficiency, Elon Musk has famously, he sacked, or he got rid of 85% of Twitter, and it's still running pretty flawlessly. There's been a lot of speculation that he might get the Secretary of State for Government Efficiency. Would you like to see that? What could someone like Elon Musk do in terms of saving tax dollars?
I don't think he'll take an actual specific role in cabinet. I think what he will do is be a consultant for the American people, identify inefficiencies, and get the whacking stick out. I love that idea. I love the idea that we've never really scraped the fat out of the federal government, and it's big, porky, fat, dripping with opportunity to cut. But the only way you can do that is you need a mandate from the top dog, the president, because no agency wants to be downsized. You walk in saying, I want to fire a third of you. They're not going to help you. But he'll identify opportunity. I call it release the hounds, because what taxpayer, regardless of what your politics are, red or blue or independent, who wouldn't want to save money by just chopping out all the waste in the federal government? And I think if there's one man that has the ability to do that, proven executional skills, it's Elon Musk. So I really endorse this idea.
Well, I think it could be a great team, obviously, with Donald Trump and the art of the deal. To speak on the international scale, with tariffs, obviously it's a word that Trump has bandied around a lot. What does that mean for, I suppose, the average Joe in America, and for the future of international trade? We're looking at China, we're looking at EV production. What do Trump's tariffs mean?
So tariffs were used as a form of rhetoric weaponry during the election cycle. Harris called them sales tax, like a VAT tax that we have in Europe. That's not what they are. In fact, there's a bill cruising around the Hill right now in the U.S. It's a tariff reciprocal act. And what it says is any of our trading partners that impose tariffs will put a reciprocal, identical tariff So if Germany puts 10% on cars, we'll put 10% on their cars coming to the U.S., that kind of thing. And of course, there's a new act, the new NAFTA 2.0, if you want to call it that governs Canada, the United States, and Mexico, big trading partners. The one entity that I think you're going to see a lot more pressure on is China. China doesn't abide by the rules of the WTO. They joined in 1999 with all kinds of promises to play by the rules. They never did. So I'm an advocate for using tariffs to squeeze their heads like teenage pimples. And the way I point that out is to say, look, the only way a supreme leader stays in power perpetually is everybody has bread and butter. You have to have a job. Otherwise, you riot against the supreme leader. And that's just the way it is in a communist dictatorship. So the way you squeeze the supreme leader's head is you say, look, let's pick a sector. I'm just going to use an example. Yoga mats. Let's say the U.S. orders 1 million yoga mats a week from China. You put a 400% tariff on it. And all the people making yoga mats in China lose their jobs. And they don't have any bread and butter anymore. And the Supreme Leader goes, oh my goodness, I don't have any jobs for these yoga mat makers. And then you say, well, where else can we inflict some damage? Let's do it in this sector. Put on 400% tariff there. Squeezing that teenage pimple till it pops. Then he gets on an airplane and flies to Washington saying, just kidding, just kidding. I want to work out and be part of the, Reciprocal Tariff Act. Because China only understands the stick. They don't understand anything else.
It's a game of chicken.
Well, Trump scares his adversaries because he's unpredictable. He's just very unpredictable. When you know what your adversary is going to do all the time and they signal it to you beforehand, you're not scared of him anymore. They're scared shitless of Trump. And that's, excuse my French, but that's basically how it works. That's why you're seeing all these guys saying, oh, we want to have peace now. No, we want to stop. Because he's very unpredictable. So in the case of China, squeezing the supreme leader to the table is a good thing. So I would like to go to 400% tariffs. Because I do business in China. They don't play by the rules.
And how about on EVs? Because obviously, even a 20% or even a 30% tariff on EVs, I believe in the EU, they're trying to flood the market. Obviously, Germany's not happened. We've seen Volkswagen cut 1,000 jobs in 2 months ago.
The point is, tariffs are temporary. They're a negotiating tactic. But if you're going to put them on, don't screw around. Go to 400%. Make it impossible for them to sell any widgets anywhere. So if you put 400% on an EV, no one's going to buy it. Only the Chinese can buy it. So all the people making the EVs, no bread, no butter. That's how you do it. Now, if I was the minister of Chinese head squeezing, that's how I would do it. And believe me, they will be at the table so fast because they cannot afford to have unemployment in that economy. And it's showing some cracks there. So you want to hit them while they're down and bring them to the table. They cheat on IP, they steal. You can't use their courts. Good example that people should focus on is Twitter, or not Twitter, but TikTok. TikTok has been deemed Chinese spyware by the American Congress. That's a bipartisan bill. By midnight on Jan 19th in the U.S., the servers are going to get turned off.
I've heard you say as well that you would like to buy it,
I would.
a consortium. Do you want to buy Twitter?
Yeah,
TikTok?
I would definitely buy TikTok. I would buy it because it's a great, it depends what I get with it. If I don't get the algorithm, all I'm getting is a mailing list, so I pay a lot less for that. But we'll see how this goes because, remember, they did this in India. After 4 years, they had 200 million users on it, and the Supreme Leader would not, play by the rules with the Indian government, and they said, we'll just turn it off. And everybody was squeamish for a week, and then they forgot about it. They just drifted onto other social media platforms. So, again, squeezing the Supreme Leader's head there is good. And it is spyware. I would never put that on a phone that I have sensitive data on. It's Chinese spyware. Everybody knows that. That's why it's shut down. They just shut it down in Canada. I mean, they're going to shut it down everywhere. But this is the arrogance of the Supreme Leader. He doesn't care. So you've got to squeeze his head. He will appreciate the head squeezing. He will thank you for it.
And is it the same, obviously, with the likes of Vladimir Putin and the war between Israel and Hamas? War is not good for business. Do you think Trump is going to have a large enough impact? He said famously, I will stop the wars within the first day of office. Do you think that's true?
Putin is understands force. Not a very nice guy. He's killed a lot of people. But 25,000 young Russians a month lose their lives. He's buying their services now. There's no more patriots left. You get coffin money, your family gets a house, but you go die or get blown up. That's pretty brutal. So I would think giving him a call and saying, look, you know, I've been thinking about this war. I don't like it. I don't want to pay for the Ukrainian costs, and I want it to stop. Come to the table, or I'll do something that will really surprise you, which is probably what people worry about with Trump, because we saw how he ended the Syrian conflict by just saying, I'm going to kill this guy. And he did. And I think that kind of erratic nature is what these adversaries worry about. Now, a lot of NATO players don't like to hear this, but I think war's horrible. I think all these people and children losing their lives is horrible. It's just, somebody has to stop this.
Exactly, and on a human level, but as well as
obviously
markets. So
the world
affects
is
the bread and
uncomfortable.
butter as well. So you're taking food off of people's tables, affecting jobs, as well as the human suffering. It's bad all around.
It is. So I think people are willing to try a different way. Now, whether Trump's successful or not, we'll see. But this carnage of death of young children, I can't watch it anymore. No one can.
Of course.
It's got to stop.
Then, moving on to cryptocurrency, we've seen markets as well as the price of Bitcoin increase. It broke $72,000, I believe, in the past few days. Do you believe under Trump, what is the height that you think it can get to under a Trump presidency?
So Trump has signaled, and the market knows this, that he is in favor of digital payment system, which includes Bitcoin, which is an asset class. I'm not saying that's a digital payment system, but it's no different than gold. I mean, you can own some gold, you can own some Bitcoin. I own both. What the problem is, we don't have institutional support for it yet because it's not regulated in the U.S. The way other commodities are. So the rumor on the street is that the CFTC, which regulates commodities, is going to get the mandate for crypto, and they're looking for someone to run it. And they'll probably take a lot of that away from Gensler at the SEC, who's been litigating this sector, and successfully, I might add. He's, all the crypto cowboys, like Binance, CZ, he's a felon now. You know what happened to Sam Bankman-Fried. So people that took on Gensler all lost, and this is probably a good thing. So we move into a phase now where it's going to be regulated. There's a lot of optimism about it. Here in Abu Dhabi, we have the M2 exchange, which is a very interesting idea because it's completely compliant with its regulator. I see a lot of upside coming in crypto.
And a figure, just briefly, do you think, what's the limit? Do you think it can reach 200K under a Trump presidency?
I think we'll all see 100,000 shortly. I feel everybody should have 5% weighting in gold in their portfolio. Nothing wrong with 5% weighting in Bitcoin. I mean, why not? I mean, unless you really think, and you don't have to do this, I'm just saying alternative asset classes in times of uncertainty and inflation are good. I mean, I own gold and I've had it my whole life. I was given a locket from my Irish father when I was 11 years old that had a gold coin in it. That's when I fell in love with it. I've had that ever since. And I own bullion, I own ETFs. I mean, gold is gold. The Romans loved it, I love it. Bitcoin is the new. It's not as old as gold, but it's performed very well for me.
Yeah. And just lastly, speaking on gold, obviously to have Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful in the studio, it would be a shame if I didn't ask about watches. You are, I would say, the most famous watch collector in the world now, doing millions of views on YouTube every month with the likes of Teddy Baldassar. He has just opened his new watch shop. I want to ask you, would you ever think of entering the watch strap business? The red bands are... They're synonymous with you.
It's a great question, but what I've learned about watch collecting and getting access, I mean, the thing that in my journey into horology is, in order to get watchmakers that are really unique, who make only a few pieces a year, you need to be known as a collector. And what does that mean? It means that you support the art. It's no different than contemporary art, and you don't flip them. So flipping a watch, when you get a reputation for buying it at the entry price from the watchmaker and then turning around and selling it for 4 times that the next week, you're not a collector, you're just a flipper. And the watch community is very small. You know, in terms of the makers, there's probably 25 makers of consequence worldwide. The word gets out overnight that you're not a real collector. And so it takes a long time to earn the trust of an F.P. Journe or a Simon Britt or any of these makers. And I'm known I've never sold a watch. And so I have a very vast collection, and I'm a dial guy, as you know. So I'm always looking for the new dial. I'm wearing a Moser, a unique dial here. And of course, this is a classic Daytona. I thought, this is New York time, this is Abu Dhabi time. And so I support. The thing about getting into the business of retailing watches or retailing bands is all of a sudden...
I'd buy it, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I'm
100%.
You're no
I'll pay
longer
a pretty penny for an O'Leary band.
But I'm very fortunate. Every watch company knows I won't wear it unless it has a red band. So they don't even offer me watches if they can't put a red band on. I would never buy them. So my whole thing's red band because it looks fantastic. Great with gold, great with platinum. I mean, this looks gorgeous. Works with my red.
Of course.
I just wonder if
like on Shark Tank.
Yeah, the whole thing is, you know, it's just over the years it's become one of my things. But each maker, watches are really a beautiful thing because they mark a period in your life. Every time I do a big deal, I buy a new watch, and I associate that deal with that watch. And you know, my daughters try and steal them, my wife, my son. Nobody gets to touch my watches. Like, that's it. That's the one thing that I've got. They're in vaults all around the world, you know, and I just love it. I just have so much fun. And the reason I like it is the community of watch collectors that I know all around the world are very eclectic. Surgeons, artists, financiers, royalty, you name it. And
journalists?
Yes, journalists. We share the passion of watches, and I think it enriches my life.
Great. Kevin O'Leary, a millionaire investor, host of the Smash Hit Show at Shark Tank. Thank you so much for your time.
You got it. Thank you.